Chloe Davenport was born into Chicago royalty penthouses, champagne, political power. On the night of her 10th anniversary, surrounded by the city's elite, she discovers her father's empire has collapsed overnight. But the bankruptcy isn't the real betrayal. Because when she turns to the man she trusts most, her husband, he already knows. And worse, he is relieved. This isn't just a story about losing money. It is about watching love, power, and identity burn in real time.
My name is Chloe Davenport. For 3 decades, in Chicago, that name was a brand. It meant Gold Coast penthouses and charity galas you only see in magazines. It meant being the only daughter of Richard Davenport, a real estate titan who taught me that a good name was the only asset that never loses value. Until it did. My entire world came crashing down, of all places, at our 10th anniversary party. Darling, the orchids are breathtaking. Ava Sterling purred, air-kissing me while scanning the room for someone more important. A little floral boutique, I know. I lied. My smile was a well-practiced mask. The orchids, flown in from Hawaii, were the cheapest thing here. Our entire 8,000-square-foot penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan was a monument to success. Vintage champagne poured from an enormous ice sculpture, and a jazz trio played something smooth and expensive in the corner. Every polished surface showed the reflection of Chicago's elite. My husband, Julian, was holding court by the grand windows, his laugh a confident signal that the night was perfect. He caught my eye and gave me a little wink, and my heart did the same stupid little flip it had for 10 years. Julian Croft, with his tech founder charisma and a jawline you could sharpen a knife on, was the perfect partner to carry on the Davenport legacies. Or so I thought. My phone buzzed inside my clutch. A local number I didn't have saved. I ignored it. It buzzed again, harder this time. A strange chill, the kind you spend a lifetime of privilege learning to dismiss, went right through me. "Excuse me, Ava." I walked toward the panoramic windows, the city lights glittering below. I picked up on the 4th buzz. "Chloe, it was us, my father's attorney, Mr. Sannon." His voice had lost all its usual warmth. It was just flat. "You need to get down to the Davenport Tower. Right now." "Mr. Hanson, it's our anniversary party. We have half the city here. What's wrong?" A pause. I heard frantic shouting on his end of the line. "It's over, Chloe. Davenport Properties. The feds raided the main office about 3 hours ago. The board's in an emergency meeting. The banks are calling in every single loan. Your father, he's S, for Chapter 11, both for the company and personally." The words felt like punches. Bankruptcy. That word wasn't in our world. It was for failing companies on the news. "That's impossible," I said, my own voice sounding distant. "The numbers were great last quarter," Dad told me. "The numbers were a fantasy, Chloe." Hanson's voice sank to a whisper. "He was over-leveraged. The whole thing was a house of cards. And it's all gone. Every last bit. I'm so sorry." The jazz music hit a high note. I saw Julian across the room, laughing with a senator, completely in his element. He hadn't even seen me walk away. "Where is my father?" I asked. My hand clenched around my phone. "He's locked in his office. He won't open the door. He just keeps saying he has to talk to you." "But Chloe, the sharks are already circling. The news will have us by morning. You need to prepare yourself." I hung up. Nothing in the room had changed. The champagne was still flowing. The orchids were still perfect. But the foundation had just cracked in two. I walked back into the party, my feet feeling heavy on the silk rug. I went right to Julian, touching his arm. He leaned in, his breath a mix of expensive whiskey and success. "We have to talk now." In the library. His smile got just a little bit tight. "Can it wait, honey? I'm talking with Senator Brighton." "No," I said, the ice in my voice stopping him cold. "It can't wait." He excused himself with that easy charm of his and followed me into the dark, wood-paneled library, shutting the heavy doors. The party noise vanished, replaced by a dull thrum. "What is so damn important you had to drag me away from him?" Julian asked, his charm gone. In the shadows, his face looked harder, colder. My dad's company, I said, the words catching in my throat. It's gone bankrupt. He's filing tonight. I searched his face for shock, for concern, for the we'll get through this speech I expected. But his expression did something else entirely. It relaxed. The permanent tension I always saw in his jaw just melted away. He looked relieved. I know, he said. Those 2 words were colder than the ice sculpture out in the hall. You know, Hanson called me an hour before he called you. Julian walked over to the wet bar and poured a glass of bourbon. He didn't pour one for me. He needed to know what the exposure was for Croft Ventures. He needed to make sure the contamination was contained. I just stared. Contamination? Julian, that is my father. Your father, he said, taking a sip, was running a pyramid scheme. A very clever one, but a pyramid scheme. He was using money from new developments to cover losses on old ones. The feds have been on to him for months. Tonight, it all came down. He said it like he was giving a market update. The room started to spin. I grabbed the back of my father's old reading chair, the one Julian always said he loved. How can you be so calm? We need to go to him. We need to call lawyers, PR people. We don't need to do a thing, Chloe. He put his glass down with a sharp click. You need to go help your father. I need to protect what is mine. A crack opened up in my chest. What's yours? My company, my reputation, my money. He turned to look right at me, and I saw a man I had never met before. A cold, ruthless calculator. Our prenup is rock solid. Thank God. Croft Ventures, my investment funds, my family trust, they are all separate entities. Untouchable by your father's creditors or by you. Every word was a deliberate cut. This isn't personal, Chloe. It's financial. Your last name is Davenport. And as of tonight, that name is radioactive. It's a liability. He stepped closer to me. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning. My attorneys already have the paperwork drawn up. I couldn't breathe. I let out a sharp, crazy laugh. You're joking. This has to be a joke. Some sick punishment because I bought the wrong kind of bourbon. I've never been more serious. He pulled a crisp, folded document out of his tuxedo. He brought divorce papers to our anniversary party. This is the separation agreement. It lays everything out. You sign it tonight. We keep things quiet. You get a small settlement. If you fight me, he shrugged, you'll lose, and you'll end up with nothing but scandal and lawyers' fees. I stared at the papers like they were a snake. A small settlement? What about this penthouse? This is my home. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. This penthouse is in my name, Chloe. Always has been. A wedding gift from my family. You just live here. It's my asset, not ours. Same with the lake house and the place in Vale. All protected, all mine. 10 years of careful, loving lies fell apart in front of me. The homes I had furnished, the life I thought we had built, it was all just a movie set. You knew, I whispered, the horror of it finally hitting me. You planned for this. You never put my name on a single deed. That prenup you pushed for it wasn't to protect us. It was to protect you from me. It's just business, darling, he said, the word darling twisting like a knife. You always have to prepare for a market correction. And your father's empire was the biggest risk on the board. The shock turned into pure, white-hot rage. You son of a bitch. All of it. Was any of it ever real? His eyes flickered, not with regret, but with something like impatience. It felt real, sure. But this is the real world, Chloe. And in the real world, when a ship goes down, it pulls everything around it under. I'm not going down with the Davenports. He held out the papers with a pen. Sign them tonight. Pack a suitcase. Be out of here by the end of the week. It's the cleanest option. Go to hell. His face hardened into a mask. Fine, have it your way. But if you fight me, I will bury you. I have the best lawyers in the country. You have a bankrupt father and a family name that's about to be tabloid poison. Sign the papers. Take the settlement. You can walk away with your dignity and a couple $1 million to start over. A Couple million. The thought was so insane it almost made me laugh. My entire life reduced to a small payoff. My own trust fund will be frozen with all the other Davenport assets. The feds will take it all. This settlement is a lifeboat. My final act of generosity. The word was like poison in my mouth. Just then, the library door creaked open. A blonde head poked in. Isabel. My best friend since we were kids. Her face was a perfect picture of concern that never quite reached her eyes. Darling, is everything all right? People are starting to whisper. Of course, they were. In the Bay Area, gossip traveled faster than fiber optics. Julian didn't even flinch. Come in, Alara. Perfect timing. Chloe was just helping me finalize a decisions that changes everything for us. She slipped inside, shutting the study door. She didn't look at me. She moved to Julian's side, her hand on his shoulder, a gesture of ownership and intimacy. Another gear in the nightmare clicked into place. You, I whispered. The two of you. Chloe had the nerve to look almost sympathetic. Alara, it's just business. Julian and I, we on the same page. We operate in a world that can afford sentimental failures. How long? My voice was barely there. Julian answered. Long enough. Does it really matter? It did. It mattered because every late-night coding session, every investor dinner, every secret shared between best friends was now a lie. Every time she'd reassured me about Julian's long hours, every time she'd gushed about our view of the bridge, it was all an act. Get out, I said, my voice shaking as I tried to hold myself together. Both of you, get out of my home. My home, Julian corrected, his voice dangerously calm. He slid the documents across the desk. The terms? Alara, my lawyer gets here at 9 a.m. I suggest you be pragmatic for once. He took Chloe's hand, her hand, and led her from the study back toward the dying pulse of my party, my marriage, my entire life. I just stood there, alone in the silent, glass-walled room. Through the door, I could hear the party chatter fade, the goodbyes becoming more abrupt. The music stopped. I went to the window and looked down. One by one, the line of Teslas and Rivians pulled away from the curb, their taillights vanishing into the fog like rats fleeing a sinking ship. My phone buzzed. A news alert. Breaking. Tech giant collapses. Vance Innovations files for Chapter 11. SEC launches investigation. I collapsed into my father S. Eames' chair, the cold leather a shock. I picked up the settlement agreement. The language was cold, efficient. It specified a voluntary exit from the marital property, a one-time payment of $2 million a joke, and forfeiture of any claim to any other asset. In exchange, Julian offered a swift, quiet divorce. No contest. My hands were shaking. I reached for the pen. It was a heavy, custom-made thing, a gift from our seed investors. I thought of my father, alone in his office, his life's work turning to ash. I thought of Julian's cold, triumphant gaze, of Chloe's casual betrayal. I put the pen down. I wasn't signing. Not like this. Maybe it was just foolish pride. Maybe it was the last scrap of the Vance spine my father insisted I have. Never make a deal on your knees, Alara. Even if you were standing in your own grave. But I was in a grave. The grave of the woman I was just this morning. The door opened again. It was Maria, our house manager. Her kind face was a mask of concern. Mrs. Thorne, the guests have all departed. The staff, what are your instructions? I looked at this woman who had managed our lives with quiet competence for 5 years. I thought of the others, the chef, the cleaners, the driver, their lives all tied to this tech bubble that had just spectacular bursts. Give everyone the rest of the week off with full pay and thank them for everything. She nodded, her eyes getting glassy. She knew. They all knew. When she was gone, the silence was absolute. I was alone in the 5,000-square-foot penthouse that was no longer my home, married to a man who was no longer my husband, the daughter of a man who was now a villain. I pulled out my phone. I had 12 missed calls. Only one of them mattered. I dialed. It rang 4 times. Then he picked up. Dad. My voice shattered on the word. A little girl's voice. Ilara. My father's voice was exhausted, aged a lifetime in a day, but it was steady. It was the voice that had explained algorithms to me, that taught me to sail, that told me I could build anything, you heard. Julian S. leaving me, he S. taking it all. He knew, Dad. He knew before anyone. A long, weary sigh came through the phone. I am so sorry, sweetheart, for all of it. This is my fault, my arrogance, my failure. What do I do now? The question was a whisper. You survive, he said, and I could hear that old titanium strength, fractured but there in his voice. You are a Vance. We done to shatter. We recalibrate and we relaunch. Do you hear me? He wants me to sign tonight. Don T. My father's voice was sharp, immediate. Don't you sign it a single damn thing. Not until you speak to a lawyer. My lawyer. Gerald, he is still my lawyer, and he is still the best. Promise me, I promise. Good girl. Now listen, this is going to get messy. The tech press, they'll come after you too. Go dark. Don't talk to anybody. I'm calling Gerald right now. He'll be in touch. Dad, are you going to be okay? It was an absurd question. Nothing was okay. I've coded my way out of worse bugs, he said, and I could almost hear the shadow of his smile. Just promise me one more thing. Anything don't. Let him see you cry. Not that snake. He isn't too worth one of your tears. A single hot tear slid down my cheek even as he said it. I wiped it away. Angry, okay. I love you, Ilara. No matter what happens tomorrow, or the day after, you remember that. I love you too, Dad. The line clicked dead. I sat there in the dark office, in the wreckage of my old life, and I did not cry. I made a list in my head. Call Gerald. Find my own lawyer. Secure any capital I can access before it's all frozen. Find a place to live. The scale of it all was suffocating. Somewhere in the silent apartment, a clock ticked. The night stretched out before me, empty and terrifying. The world I was built for, the world I helped rule, had evaporated between a polite thank you from a guest and the closing of an elevator door. My name was Ilara Vance, and as of tonight, that name was worthless. As I sat there in the dark, a tiny bit of something else began to grow. Not hope. Something colder, sharper, more focused. It meant I had nothing left to lose. Sleep never came. I spent the hours after the party's last gasp wandering the huge, silent penthouse, a ghost haunting her own gallery. Every piece of art, every curated book, every photo of a happy couple on a boat somewhere warm. It all felt like evidence from a crime scene. A crime I didn't even know was happening to me. By morning, the first gray light of a terrible new day crept over the Golden Gate Bridge. I was showered, dressed in a crisp blouse and slacks, my armor, and sitting at the kitchen island with a cold coffee. My laptop was open. The internet had already tried and convicted the Vance name. Vance scam, screamed one headline. Empire of Code collapses, reported the Chronicle, more formally but just as brutal. My father's face, once beaming from the cover of Wired, was now the grim icon of failure on every tech blog. My own social feeds were a flood of notifications, some shock, but mostly the morbid curiosity of the online mob. A few friends had already unfollowed me. Chloe, I noticed with a cold, detached feeling, had posted a sunrise picture from her balcony with the caption, "New Day, New Horizons." #grateful. I heard Julian ask expensive shoes on the polished concrete floor before I saw him. He appeared in the doorway, already wearing a perfectly tailored suit. His tie was knotted precisely. He looked refreshed, energized, like a man who just closed the deal of a lifetime. You re-up early, he noted, walking to the espresso machine without looking at me. Couldn't sleep. The sound of my world collapsing was a little loud. He ignored the sarcasm, perfectly steaming milk. My lawyer, David Chen, will be here at 9. Did you look over the agreement? I glanced at the papers. Seems like you valued me at roughly the price of a mid-range electric vehicle. He finally turned, leaning against the counter, holding his coffee. It's a generous offer, Ilara, considering you would be an absolute fool not to take it. If you fight me, you'll burn through that $2 million in legal fees inside of a year, and you will lose. I have everything documented. The prenup is ironclad. Your father's fraud makes any claim you have on our assets completely toxic. It's done, Alara. Sign the papers. Take the money and start over somewhere quiet. Maybe Portland. The condescension in his voice felt like a slap. I'm not going to Portland, Julian. This is my city. San Francisco is my home. Not anymore. His voice was quiet, absolute. The building SHOA is already scheduling an emergency meeting. Having someone linked to a major tech scandal living here is bad for property values. You understand. They will push you out. I will push you out. It will be so much easier if you just leave. I stood up, my legs shaking, but holding firm. I am not signing a thing until I speak with my own lawyer. Gerald Buchanan is representing me. For a second, something crossed his face annoyance. Gerald is drowning in your father's disaster. He won't have time to walk you through a divorce. And honestly, his reputation is just as toxic as yours now. You're better off finding someone on Yelp. He checked his watch. I have to go. The markets are going to be a bloodbath today. So many opportunities. He said it with a predator's smile. He was going to get rich off my family's ruin. Of course he was. You knew, didn't you? The words hung in the air, heavier than the chicory coffee smell. You knew my father's business was sinking before last night, maybe for months. He placed his cup down with unnerving calm. I'm in the business of knowing things, Clara. It's what I do. I saw the rot in Beaumont Properties ages ago. I just positioned myself. Positioned yourself. I tasted the bitter words. By marrying the founder's daughter? Was our life just part of the deal? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was in the cold void where his love should have been. And Chloe, I pushed, my voice trembling. Was she part of your strategy too? Your backup? A source of company secrets. For a split second, his mask of cold composure cracked, showing pure irritation. Leave Chloe out of this. This is about us. It's just business. It was my life. The words echoed in the huge, empty kitchen. My father, my marriage, my best friend. This wasn't some hostile takeover on paper. It was my entire life. And now that chapter's over, he said, his voice dropping to a low threat. Sign the divorce papers, Clara. Be at the board meeting at 9, or I'll have security drag you out of this penthouse just as you are. Don't you dare test me. He turned and walked out. I heard the private elevator doors slide shut. He was gone. The silence he left behind felt alive, crushing me. I felt like I was drowning in it. I had to move, do anything. I couldn't just sit in this beautiful prison and wait for the vultures to land. My first call was to my lawyer, Arthur. It went straight to a full voicemail box. I tried his private line at the firm. A polished receptionist told me Mr. Finch was in back-to-back meetings and couldn't be reached. Cold, sharp panic started to creep in. I was completely on my own. No, not quite. I grabbed a designer duffel and threw in clothes, my passport, some family jewelry, and my laptop. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. Walking past the console table, I saw our wedding photo from the Amalfi Coast. My smile was so bright, so genuine. His was smug, confident, the look of a man who just conquered a new market. I slid the photo from its silver frame, ripped it right down the middle, and threw his smiling half in the trash. The Beaumont family townhouse was a limestone mansion on the Upper East Side. It had belonged to my mother's family for a century. I learned to walk on its polished marble floors. I had my 18th birthday party in its massive ballroom. It was the one part of our legacy I believed was safe, locked in a trust. The black town car with tinted windows parked across the street was my first warning sign. The second was an official notice taped to the huge carved front doors. A seizure order from the United States Marshals Service. This property is now under federal jurisdiction. I just stood on the sidewalk, the bright morning sun feeling like a cruel joke, staring at that paper. They had moved so fast. The government does not waste time. My childhood home was now a federal crime scene. I fumbled in my purse for my keys. The heavy old brass key felt foreign in my hand now. I pushed it into the lock. It wouldn't budge. They'd already changed the locks. "Ma'am, you can't go in there." A uniformed guard stepped out from the entryway shadows. He was young, his expression apologetic, but his stance was firm. "This is my house," I said, my voice sounding distant and hollow. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the property is sealed by court order. Nobody is allowed inside without express permission from the U.S. Attorney's Office." He subtly nodded toward the black car. "They have the place under surveillance." I looked at the car, and I could feel their eyes on me. "My father, Edward Beaumont. Is he in there?" The guard's face softened into something like real pity. "No, ma'am. He hasn't been here since yesterday. The agents escorted him downtown for questioning. I haven't seen him since." My legs felt weak. They had him. My father, who played golf with judges and wore hand-tailored suits, was in some sterile interrogation room. "Do you know where he is right now? Is he under arrest?" "I'm sorry, I don't have that information. You'll need to contact his lawyer. The one who won't answer my calls." I nodded, a jerky mechanical motion. I walked back to the curb, where the car service charged to Julian's corporate account, a fact that now made me sick, was waiting. I gave the driver the address for Beaumont Tower in Midtown. The building, a monument of glass and steel, was under attack. News vans clogged the street, their antennas pointing at the tower like weapons. Reporters and camera crews were swarming behind police barricades. A few protesters with angry signs were screaming at the entrance. I slipped on my darkest sunglasses, kept my head down, and told the driver to take me around back to the service entrance. The guard at the loading dock, Sal, recognized me immediately. He'd worked here for 20 years. He used to sneak me candy bars when I'd visit my dad's office as a little girl. Today his face was full of pain. "Miss Beaumont, you really shouldn't be here." "Sal, I have to get up to my father's office. Please." He hesitated, glancing nervously toward the chaos out front. "It's a total circus. The feds are everywhere, taking boxes out. They're gutting the place. It's just not right what they're doing. Please, Sal." He let out a long, defeated sigh and nodded. He buzzed me into the service elevator. "Go on up to the executive floor. But you have to be careful. They've got agents on every landing." The elevator doors opened onto the 50th floor. The usual hushed, expensive silence was gone. It was replaced by a grim, organized chaos. Men and women in off-the-rack suits, FBI and Justice Department, were pushing carts stacked high with document boxes. They were pulling files from cabinets, disconnecting servers, and sealing everything with yellow evidence tape. The modern art was gone from the walls, leaving pale, ghost-like outlines. The remaining staff were huddled in small, stunned groups, whispering to each other. I walked in a daze toward the corner office, my father's private domain. The door was wide open. 2 agents were inside. One was documenting the room with a camera. The other was packing my father's prized collection of antique maps into a foam-lined crate. "You can't be in here," the one with the camera said, his tone more tired than harsh. "I'm his daughter." The 2 men shared a quick look. The older one, a man with weary eyes and a surprisingly gentle face, gave a slight nod. 2 minutes. Just don't touch a thing." I stepped over the threshold. The room felt desecrated. The massive mahogany desk was completely bare. Its surface was smeared with the gray dust of fingerprinting powder. The big leather chair was askew, as if my father had stood up in a great hurry. I could almost picture him here, just yesterday, finally facing the consequences. My eyes darted around the room, desperate for something, a sign, a note, anything. And then I saw it, taped to the bottom of the desk's center drawer. It was a spot only someone who knew his little habits would ever check. A small, plain white envelope with no name on it. My heart began to pound in my chest. I glanced over at the agents. They were busy, debating the best way to transport a large, fragile globe from the 16th century. I walked slowly toward the desk, pretending to inspect an empty spot on the wall. In one smooth movement, I reached under, pulled the envelope free, and slid deep into my coat pocket. "Time's up, Miss Beaumont." The older agent's voice was soft. "I'm sorry about all this. For what it's worth, your father was always a perfect gentleman with me. I worked his security detail at a fundraiser once. His unexpected kindness was a gut punch." I just nodded, unable to form words, and walked out. I skipped the service elevator this time. I took the fire stairs, needing the burn in my thighs, the physical effort. I shoved the door to the parking garage open, the cool, chemical-smelling air, a strange relief. And that's when I saw her. Leaning against a support pillar right next to a gleaming white Maserati was Chloe. She was on her phone, laughing. It was a light, carefree, musical sound that seemed to mock the concrete gloom of the garage. Then she saw me, and the laughter caught in her throat. She hung up. "Clara." "Oh my God, what are you doing down here?" I could ask you the same question. My voice was dangerously flat. "Did you come to pick over the remains? Or see if there's any furniture you can grab for the new condo you'll share with my husband?" She actually had the nerve to look embarrassed. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it's like, Chloe. Please, explain it to me. Because from my perspective, it looks an awful lot like you were sleeping with my husband while playing the part of my best friend. Did you two have fun comparing notes about me after you were done?" Her face hardened. The bubbly socialite mask dissolved, revealing something sharp and cold underneath. "You always thought everything was about you, didn't you, Clara? Your perfect little life, your perfect little marriage, your perfect family name. It was sickening. Did it ever occur to you that Julian might want a woman who actually understands how the world works? Someone who wasn't just another pretty accessory for the Beaumont brand?" The sheer poison in her voice was staggering. This wasn't just cheating. This was pure, undiluted hatred that had been building for years. So what was this? Some kind of personal liberation movement? Freeing my husband from his life of privilege? It was bound to happen. She shrugged, inspecting a flawless French manicure. "Your entire life was built on lies. Your father's empire. Your marriage. It was all a fantasy. Julian and I, we're the real deal. We see the world for what it is. You see an opportunity to trade up." I snapped. "You were always so jealous. Of the townhouse, of the money, of the name. You could never just be happy for me." "Happy for you?" she scoffed, letting out a sharp, ugly laugh. "While you were floating through life on a cloud of inherited wealth, the rest of us had to claw and scheme and fight for everything we got. You were just handed it all. Well, guess what? The family money's gone. Welcome to reality, princess. It's not pretty." She slipped into her pour, then paused, a cruel smile twisting her lips. "Oh, and that business trip Marcus took to the Bahamas last week? I was there, too. You should see my tan lines." She revved the engine and peeled out, the sound like a gunshot in the parking garage. I just stood there, shaking. The Bahamas. Marcus told me it was a quick trip to meet investors. He even brought me back a cheap seashell necklace. I'd worn it like a trophy. My stomach lurched. I sagged against the cold concrete, breathing hard, fighting down the bile and the vertigo of betrayal. The envelope in my pocket felt white hot. I stumbled back into the town car. "Just drive," I told the driver. "Anywhere." As we crawled through traffic, my fingers shook so hard I could barely tear the envelope open. Inside was a singles, heavy, old-fashioned key. It was tarnished silver, with an ornate handle. It looked like something from a fairy tale castle, not this city. No note, just the key. What was this for? Then I saw it scratched faintly into the metal were two tiny letters, A.S. Alistair Ashcraftoft. my father, and a number 774. It meant nothing to me. A safe deposit box? A storage locker? My phone buzzed an unknown number. I answered, wary. Kennedy Ashcraft? A man's voice asked, smooth and cold. Who is this? My name is David Chin. I'm Marcus Thorne's attorney. We had an 11 a.m. meeting. You missed it. I'm aware. My client's offer was time-sensitive, Ms. Ashcraft. His patience isn't infinite. The separation terms required your immediate departure from the penthouse. Since you didn't comply, we're proceeding to the next phase. A cold dread pooled in my gut. What does that mean? It means that, as of noon today, the locks on the penthouse were changed. Your belongings are being boxed and moved to storage. Your access codes are deactivated. Any attempt to enter the property will be considered trespassing, and we will call the police. He'd actually done it. He locked me out of my own home. You can't do that! I live there! You were a licensee, Ms. Ashcraft, not a tenant. Mr. Thorne, the owner, has revoked that license. It's perfectly legal. The storage facility details are in your email. You have 30 days to collect your things before they're considered abandoned. I've also sent the divorce petition filed this morning. I suggest you find a lawyer. Good day. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, the world tilting. I was homeless, penniless. My husband was a stranger, my best friend a snake. My father was in some legal nightmare. All I had were the clothes I was wearing, my purse, my laptop, and that strange old key. Where to, ma'am? The driver asked, his eyes full of pity in the rearview mirror. I had no answer. A hotel? With what money? My credit cards were all tied to joint accounts Marcus had probably already frozen. My personal account had a few $1,000s, which wouldn't last a week in this city. Then I remembered the key. 774. Henry, I asked the driver, do you know any place called 774? A business and address? He'd driven for my family for years. He thought for a second. Not an address, but there's an old private storage place downtown. High-end. They call it the Vault. I heard a client mention they use numbers, not names, for privacy. It's on Bleak Street, I think. Want to try there? It was a sliver of hope. A thread. Yes, please. Bleecker Street. The Vault was a plain brick building tucked between a trendy coffee shop and a tech startup in Tribeca. No sign, just a discreet brass plaque next to a heavy steel door. 774 Secure Holdings. My heart pounded. 774. I pressed the buzzer. A camera whirred to life, focusing on me. Yes? A tinny voice crackled from the speaker. My name is Kennedy Ashcraft. I have key number 774. After a long pause, the door buzzed and clicked open. The air inside was cool and quiet, smelling of old paper and lemon polish. The small lobby was dominated by a huge mahogany desk. Behind it sat an old man with a shock of white hair and flint-gray eyes, wearing a suit from another era. Miss Ashcraft, he said, his voice a dry rustle. We've been expecting you. A chill ran right down my spine. Expecting me? Who? Your father. He said you might come. He left instructions. The man held out a liver-spotted hand. The key, please. I gave him the ornate key. He studied it, nodded, and stepped out from behind the desk. This way. He led me through another heavy door and down a long, quiet hall lined with massive vault doors. 771, 772, we stopped at 774. He inserted the key, turned it with a heavy clunk, and pulled the giant circular door open. You have 1 hour, he said. The room is private. No cameras. When you're done, just close the door. It locks on its own. Return the key on your way out. He turned and vanished down the hall, his steps swallowed by the carpet. I stepped inside. The vault was small, silent, and climate-controlled. In the middle of the room was a plain wooden table. On it sat 3 items: a sealed manila envelope with my name in my father's bold handwriting, a small velvet jewelry box, and a slim silver burner phone. My hands were shaking so much I could barely rip the envelope open. It started, my dearest Kennedy. If you are reading this, Things have gone as badly as I feared, and for that, I am sorrier than you'll ever know. I failed you, and that failure I will carry to my grave. First, know that I love you. Nothing you read in the papers changes that. You have always been the best part of me. Second, you are in danger. Maybe not physical danger, but the kind that destroys lives. Marcus Thorne is not the man you think he is. His courtship, your marriage, it was all a strategic move from the very start. He was recruited by a rival firm, the Grayson Group, to get close to you, to get close to me, to find our weaknesses. He's a predator. And I, like a fool, walked my greatest treasure right into his jaws. The Bankrupt's part of it is real. The losses are bad, but it's also a smokescreen, a controlled demolition. The whole truth is more complicated than I can write down. Even here, the phone will ring once. You must answer it. The box contains what I was able to save. It isn't much, but it's yours, free and clear. Use it to stay safe and be smart. Trust no one. Not the lawyers, not our old friends, and definitely not anyone connected to Marcus. They have eyes everywhere. My biggest mistake, darling, was not teaching you how to be ruthless. I wanted to protect you from the ugliness of this world, and in doing so, I left you completely defenseless. Forgive me. When the frings, you'll know what to do. Be brave. Be the Ashcraft I raised you to be. All my love. I read the letter again and again. The words swam before settling into a horrifying new picture. Marcus, a predator, a planned attack. My entire marriage, a lie. A scheme cooked up by my husband and his cronies. I felt the room spin. I grabbed the table to steady myself. The Grayson Group. I knew that name. Arthur Grayson, a corporate dinosaur who'd been trying to destroy my father's company for years. My father always called him a Neanderthal with a checkbook. Grayson was at the gala last night. I remember seeing him slap Marcus on the back, laughing that booming laugh of his. I thought nothing of it. I opened the velvet box. Inside, on black silk, were my mother's diamond earrings, the simple studs she wore every single day. Underneath them was a thick stack of old-fashioned bearer bonds. I counted them. $500,000. Nothing compared to what I'd lost, but it was cash, untraceable, a lifeline, and under the bonds, a Canadian passport. In my name, but the photo was different. My hair was dark, cut in a bob I'd never had. Kennedy Marie Thorne was gone. In her place, Kendra Marie Smith, with a new birthday. The passport looked completely real. My father didn't just predict this, he prepared for it. A new identity, an escape plan. The thought was terrifying. As I stared at the new me, the silver burner phone shrieked on the table. A sharp electronic sound that made me flinch. My heart hammered. "Answer it," my father's words echoed. I flipped it open. "Hello?" Silence. Then the sound of breathing. A voice finally spoke, digitally distorted, impossible to place. "The key isn't just for the vault." I froze. "Who is this?" "A friend of your father's." "Listen, you are being watched." "A private eye Mason, hired by your husband. He tailed you from your father's building. He's outside the vault now in a gray Chevy Malibu. Illinois plate Kilo Lincoln 79 Romeo 2. Don't go back the way you came." A shock of pure terror shot through me. Followed. Of course, Richard would want to know everything, especially since I refused to sign. What now? In the back of this vault, the third panel from the left, push the bottom right corner. It opens a service passage. It takes you to the basement of the building next door. A bookbindery. Leave through their loading dock on the alley. A black SUV will be there. Get in. The driver is Silas. He will get you somewhere safe. I'm not going anywhere with some stranger, I whispered, my voice shaking. Your other option is to walk out that front door right into your husband's trap. He was told to record your every move, everyone you meet. He will hound you until you have nowhere left to hide. Your father's gift won't stay secret for long if Richard learns it exists. Trust has to begin somewhere, Elena. Your father trusts me. That's all you need to know right now. The call ended. I just stood there in the silent vault. The phone felt like a dead weight in my hand. Fear battled with desperation. This was crazy. Secret tunnels, disguised voices, safe houses. This was stuff from the movies. Not for people who spent summers on Lake Geneva. But then again, people who summered on Lake Geneva didn't have their entire lives torched overnight by a cheating husband and a disgraced father. I glanced at my mother's jewelry, the bearer bonds, the fake passport. My father, for all his flaws, was never a man to do things by halves. He planned this. He knew I was in real danger. My choice was made. I slid the jewelry and bonds into the lining of my coat. I put the passport and the burner phone into my handbag. I folded my father's letter and placed it in my pocket, close to my heart. I found the panel on the wall. It was seamless, totally invisible unless you knew to look for it. I pressed the bottom right corner. With a soft whoosh of air, a piece of the wall swung open, showing a dark, narrow passage that smelled of damp concrete and age. I took a final look around the vault, at the last remnants of my former life arranged on the table. Then, I stepped into the blacknesses. The door hissed shut right behind me, sealing me inside. A single, dim, emergency light flickered on above me. I followed the corridor, my steps echoing loudly. It ended at a heavy steel door. I shoved it open. I was in a dusty, cluttered basement that smelled of old paper and glue. The hum of machinery rumbled from upstairs. I weaved through boxes toward a sliver of daylight from a loading dock door, left ajar. I peeked out onto the quiet alley, and there, idling by the curb, was a black SUV. A solid older man in a driver's cap was leaning against it, having a smoke. He noticed me, dropped the cigarette, and stamped it out. He gave a tiny nod. Silas. I took a deep breath, clutched my purse to my chest, and made a run for the vehicle. The back seat of the SUV smelled of clean leather and air freshener. Silas, the driver, was a man of very few words, with a face like a stone carving. He didn't ask a thing, just gave me a quick look in the rearview mirror and said, "Buckle up, ma'am." His voice was a low growl, like gravel turning over. We drove for what seemed like forever. A winding route through Chicago, over the Skyway, into the suburbs, down alleys in Pilsen, back over the bridge, cutting through the loop. He was looking for a tale. The professional, calculated way he drove was somehow both terrifying and deeply comforting. My life had turned into a spy movie. We finally pulled into a garage under a plain pre-war apartment building in Lincoln Park, not far from the university. The neighborhood was academic, respectable, a different world from the gleaming towers downtown. Silas took me up to the 4th floor in a creaky, old-fashioned elevator. He used a real key to open apartment 4C. The place was small, spotless, and had zero personality. Tan walls, a worn but clean sofa, a tiny kitchen. It looked like a corporate rental furnished from a catalog. There were no pictures, no art, nothing personal, just safety and anonymity. "Fridge is full," Silas said, his voice echoing in the small room. "Bedroom's back there, fresh sheets on the bed. This place is a ghost. No traceable links to you, your father, or anybody else. Paid for with cash. You don't exist here." He put a new, simple cell phone on the counter. My number is the only one in it. Use it for emergencies. Don't you call anyone from your past life. Not yet. How long am I supposed to stay here?" My voice sounded tiny as the stairful apartment. "Until things are safe. Or until you decide to take that passport and vanish." He looked at me then, his dark eyes a strange mix of sympathy and resolve. "Your father. He wanted you to have a choice, a real chance to fight back. The bonds, that new identity, that's your ticket out. The UK, South America, anywhere. You could be Anna Vance by this time tomorrow. Live a normal life. And if I don't want to run?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Then you fight. But understand this. The people you are about to go up against, they don't play by any rules. They've already taken your money, your home, your good name. They will take more if you let them. Sometimes living a good life is the best revenge, even if it's a quiet one somewhere else. I'm not the quiet life type, I said. The words surprised me with how much I meant them. Didn't figure you were, Silas grunted. I'll be in touch. Don't you go outside. Don't order any food to this address. There's a laptop on that desk. It's secure. You can read the news, but don't you log into any of your personal accounts. They'll be watching. They? Your husband, his lawyers, the Sterling Group, maybe the feds. Take your pick. He walked to the door. Get some sleep. You look like hell. And just like that, he was gone. The deadbolt clicked shut behind him. I was alone. Completely alone for the first time since it all fell apart. The silence was crushing. I collapsed onto the sofa. The adrenaline that had kept me moving finally drained away, leaving behind a deep, hollow exhaustion. I was a fugitive in my own town. I had a fortune in bearer bonds and a fake identity in my purse. A grim stranger was my only ally, and my husband wanted me gone. The burner phone in my coat pocket felt heavy. I pulled it out, along with my father's letter, and read his words again. The truth is more complicated. What was that supposed to mean? A controlled demolition. Was he saying the entire bankruptcy wasn't exactly real? Or was that just the wishful thinking of a ruined man trying to give his daughter some hope? I needed a lawyer. I needed a monster. Someone who could face off against Richard's army of corporate lawyers. But how would I pay? The bonds were my only escape plan. Using them for a legal battle against a tech billionaire felt like trying to put out a wildfire with a garden hose. I turned on the cheap laptop. It booted up to a blank screen. I opened the Chicago Tribune website. The story was at the top of the business section, but it was already old news. The market moves fast. The details were just brutal. The sheer scale of the fraud, the powerful investors who were completely wiped out. The SEC was calling it a classic Ponzi scheme. My father was being described as a charming con artist, a Madoff for the modern era. And there was one quick mention of me. Moretti's daughter Elena is married to tech mogul Richard Sterling. Sterling's representatives had no comment. Of course they didn't. He was hiding behind his lawyers, letting me and my father take the full force of the public fallout. I made a cup of instant tea and sat at the small table, just staring at the brick wall of the next building. The shock was finally wearing off, and in its place a cold, hard anger started to build. It felt cleaner than sorrow, and a hell of a lot more useful than fear. Richard, Chloe, Victor, Sterling, they had schemed to ruin my father and just toss me aside. They made my life into a game of chess, and I had been a pawn, completely blind to their moves. I would not run away. I couldn't. Running would mean they won. It would mean that everything my father built, no matter how flawed, was truly gone forever. It meant Richard and Chloe would get to live in my house, spend my family's fortune, and laugh about the naive little girl they so easily destroyed. No. I opened a new document on the laptop. At the top, I typed, "What I know. Richard's pursuit of me was a planned hostile takeover by the Sterling Group to destroy Moretti Holdings. Chloe was in on it from the start. My father knew, or at least suspected, and set up an escape plan for me. This bankruptcy fraud is far more complex than the news is reporting. A controlled demolition." I stared at the sentences. The list was pathetically short. It was all just guesswork and theory, the desperate rambling of a woman clinging to a cryptic letter from her father. I had no proof, not a single thing that would ever hold up in a courtroom. I needed real evidence, and I needed to know what really happened to my father. I picked up the clean phone Silas had given me. I dialed the only number stored in it. He answered on the very first ring. "Yeah, it's me. I need 2 things." A beat of silence. "I'm listening. First, I need you to find my father. Is my father in jail? Or has he been released? What's going on? He made bail about an hour ago. $10 million, secured by what was left of a trust in the Caymans. He's at the Peninsula Hotel under a fake name. The feds have his passport, and he's cooperating to a degree. Relief hit me, sharp and painful. He was out. He was, for the moment, safe. Can I see him? Not a good idea. That hotel is being watched by federal agents and others. A meeting would put a spotlight on you both. Use the phone he gave you. It's secure. Now, I said, a plan already forming. I need everything you have on Liam Vance. His finances, his business deals, and especially his connection to my father, Robert Sterling. I have to know if he knew about my dad's company collapsing and if he made money from it. I need a clear paper trail. Max was quiet for a long moment. You're asking to dig a very deep, very dangerous hole. Men like Vance and Sterling, they bury their secrets under shell corporations and foreign bank accounts. It's expensive to uncover. And it's not what your father wanted for you. He wanted you safe, completely out of all this. I'm already in the middle of it, Max, I said, my voice turning to ice. They just haven't pulled the trigger yet. So, are you going to help me or not? Another pause. I could almost hear him weighing the options. My father's wishes versus my absolute resolve. I'll make a few calls. It's going to take time, and it's going to cost. Those bonds your father left you, a big piece of that will vanish if you really do this. Is this really how you want to use your escape money? It's not an escape fund, I said, staring at the message on the screen. It's a war chest. A low chuckle came through the line. All right then. Stay put. I'll be in touch. And Chloe, he added, don't do anything reckless. I spent the next 48 hours trapped in that apartment, a prisoner of my own life. I ate instant soup and stale crackers. I watched the business news channels on a loop. I avoided all social media like it was radioactive. I used the secure laptop to do my own digging, but the corporate filings were a maze designed to mislead. The new phone Max gave me was silent. My old phone was a useless brick in my purse, a connection to a life that was already gone. On the third day, the quiet was shattered. Not by Max, but by the sharp buzz of the burner phone, the one from the safe deposit box. I grabbed it. Hello? It was that same digitally altered voice. Your father needs to talk to you. It's not safe to call him directly. Go to the Art Institute of Chicago, the Michigan Avenue entrance. Be in the modern wing, near the Chagall windows, at 2:05 p.m. sharp. He will find you. You have a 30-second window. Don't be early. Don't be late. Is he okay? He's holding on. The situation is always changing. Be very careful. You might still be followed. The line went dead. I looked at the time. 11 a.m. I had 3 hours. I showered and put on the same clothes I'd been wearing for days. It was all I had with me. I stared at my reflection. My face was pale with dark circles under my eyes, but my jaw was set. I saw a new hardness there I didn't recognize. Good. I took $500 from the stack of bonds, a necessary gamble, and I left the apartment. I walked 10 blocks in the opposite direction, ducked into a Walgreens, and bought a cheap Cubs hat and oversized sunglasses. I took the L train downtown, changing lines twice. I came up into Millennium Park, my heart pounding. I melted into the lunch crowd, walking toward the museum's stone lions. At 2:04 p.m., I stepped into the cool, silent grandeur of the main hall. It was a temple of art, massive and still. The afternoon sun streamed through the enormous windows. I walked to the modern wing, my footsteps silent on the polished floor. The designated bench was empty. I sat down on the cool wood, my back to the main room, facing the brilliant blues of the stained glass. My watch ticked over to 2:05. A man in a janitor's uniform sat on the bench next to mine, with a low divider between us. He never looked at me. His cap was pulled down low. He smelled of ammonia and old dust, but I recognized the set of his shoulders, the way he held his head. Dad, I breathed. The word was barely a sound. Don't look at me, he whispered, his voice raspy and tired. He pretended to wipe down the wooden bench. Just listen. We don't have much time. Are you okay? Where are you staying? I'm safe enough at the moment. The bail, that was just a gesture, a way to show I'm cooperating. But Chloe, listen closely. This is vital. Liam, he's far more dangerous than you realize. He wasn't just my father's protege. He was a secret partner. He fed my father the inside information, the little pushes that made Sterling Industries collapse exactly when and how it did. He personally shorted our stock through offshore accounts. He made a fortune from our family's ruin. Hearing it confirmed was like a punch to the gut, even though I'd suspected it. I'm not signing those papers, I whispered fiercely. I will not give him the divorce he wants. Good girl, but you have to be smart. He will get more aggressive. He wants you gonzon, discredited, and quiet. You're a problem he needs to solve. The money, the passport, that's your way out. Please, think about taking it. Go to Zurich. The key I gave you. The key. It opened the deposit box. Dad, with the letter, the cash, the passport. No, he said, his voice full of urgency. The key is a symbol. It's for the main vault at Valmont Private Bank in Zurich. The number 774 is your access code. The bonds and passport, that's just emergency cash. The real money, everything I managed to protect, is there. It's enough for you to live well for the rest of your life. A long way from here. A private bank in Switzerland. A hidden fortune. It felt like something out of a spy movie. How much? I asked, completely stunned. Enough that you will never have to think about Liam Vance ever again. But you have to leave now. Today. Max can get you to the airport. You have the passport. Use it. And what happens to you? I asked, my eyes stinging with tears of fear and anger. You want me to just run away and leave you to face all of this by yourself? To go to prison? I made my own mess, Chloe. I got greedy. I cut corners. I thought I was smarter than all of them. This is me paying the price. But you are innocent in all of this. I will not let my mistakes destroy you. Please, Chloe, for me. Go to Zurich. I thought of Liam's smug face, of Ava's cruel laugh in the garage, of a life spent in hiding, always looking over my shoulder. No, Dad. I'm not running. He took everything from my life, from our family. I am going to take it all back. My father was silent for what felt like an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with some emotion I couldn't place. Pride, maybe. Or fear. Then you'll need something to fight with. My father? Robert Sterling. He's the key. He's old-fashioned. He keeps paper records of everything. He doesn't trust digital files. He has a study in his Gold Coast townhouse with a locked drawer in his desk. If any proof of his deal with Liam exists, it'll be in there. But that house is a fortress, and my father is a dangerous man. He isn't like Liam. Liam is a snake in the grass. My father is a lion. He will destroy you if he even thinks you're a threat. Then I'll have to be smarter than him, I said, a wild, dangerous plan starting to ignite in my mind. How do I get inside? You don't. It's completely impossible. I never should have mentioned it. His voice changed, growing panicked. My time's up. Someone is signaling me. Remember, the key is for Zurich. That's your escape route, the only safe one. I love you, sweetheart. Be careful. He stood, stuffing his rag into his back pocket. Without a second glance, he just walked away. His shoulders were slumped, a simple janitor disappearing into a gallery. I just sat there for a long time, the faint smell of ammonia hanging in the air. Zurich was safety, maybe a gilded cage, but a distant one. Staying here meant going to war, a war I was horribly unprepared to fight. My cheap burner phone vibrated in my pocket, making me jump. I pulled it out. It was Max. Yeah. We've got a problem, Max said, his voice grim. Your husband. He's not waiting for the legal process anymore. He's making a play. A very public one. What are you talking about? Turn on the TV, he said. Any news station. I left the museum and found a quiet bench in the park. I opened the laptop and connected to the public Wi-Fi. I clicked on a news stream. And there he was. Liam. Standing on the steps of Daly Plaza, looking unbelievably handsome and somber in a perfect navy suit. A wall of microphones was pushed toward his face. Ava stood just behind him, to his right. Her face was a perfect mask of supportive concern. She was wearing a simple but stunning cream-colored dress. I recognized it instantly. It was one of mine from our penthouse closet. A hot, pure rage burned right through me. A reporter yelled a question. Any response to the rumors you knew about the Sterling Industries collapse, Mr. Vance? Liam held up a hand, the perfect picture of exhausted dignity. I have no comment on any ongoing investigation other than to say that I, like every other investor in Sterling Industries, am the victim of a devastating fraud. My heart truly goes out to everyone who has lost their savings and their jobs. He paused, letting the fake gravity of his words sink in. My only focus right now is on my family and on protecting what little stability we have left during this horrible time. My wife, Chloe, is naturally shattered by her grandfather's actions. She is currently taking the private time she needs to process this terrible betrayal. I'm asking the media to please respect that. My wife. The way he said it made the word a weapon. Another reporter shouted, "Is it true you've filed for divorce, Mr. Vance?" Liam's face twisted into a perfectly rehearsed mask of agony. That's a private family issue. I'll only say that the personal cost of this scandal has been devastating. My sole focus now is protecting my family and my employees at Sterling Financial from any more damage. Thank you. He turned, wrapping a possessive arm around Olivia's waist as they climbed the courthouse steps. A perfect picture of unity. The tragic power couple, weathering a storm they didn't create. The message was obvious. He was the noble husband. I was the unstable pregnant daughter of a con man, a liability he was courageously managing. My phone buzzed again, an unknown number, but my stomach clenched. I knew exactly who it was. I answered, pressing the phone to my ear without a word. I see you're not at the penthouse. Ethan's voice oozed through the line, smooth and toxic, or any of your usual spots. Hiding out, Chloe. It's not a good look for you. What do you want, Ethan? I want you to be smart. You saw the press conference. The story is written. You're the delicate, grieving wife. I'm the devoted husband. We can do this the easy way, or we can make it an absolute nightmare. Your call. You had no right to give her that necklace. The words spat out of me, a low chuckle. It's just jewelry, darling. Olivia needed something for the cameras. Besides, it always looked better on her. Now, about our divorce. I'm done being patient. The settlement is now $500,000. Take it or leave it. Go to hell, Ethan. I am trying to be reasonable here, Chloe. But if you're going to make this difficult, he paused, and I could practically hear the smirk in his voice. Did you honestly think that tacky wig and sunglasses would fool anyone? The North Side Care Home. Really? Visiting your dear old dad. A chill shot down my spine. He'd followed me. Of course he had. His private investigator, or someone new. I'd been so careful. Leave my father out of this, I whispered, my voice cracking. Oh, he's in everything, my love. He's the poison that's ruining your whole life. And now, because of your little family visit, the SEC will be very curious about what secrets the two of you are sharing. Conspiracy is a very serious charge. He was threatening to frame me as part of my father's fraud scheme. You're bluffing. Am I? Don't test me. 500,000, Chloe. It's more than you're worth. Sign the papers, and I'll make this whole ugly mess with your father disappear. I have friends in the right places. I can make sure he gets a comfortable arrangement. Fight me, and I will ruin you both. I'll make sure you burn through every last dollar of Daddy's offshore accounts on lawyers before you're sharing a cell with him. He knew about the accounts. How could he know? Unless he was just guessing, fishing, trying to see what I'd admit. I said nothing, my heart hammering against my ribs, pure panic screaming in my mind. I'll take your silence as you thinking it over, he said, his tone shifting into a cold, final judgment. but my offer has an expiration date. You have 48 hours to get out of Chicago. I don't care where you go. Just stay away from me and away from the press. If you're still in the city after that, I will unleash hell." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was dripping with so much contempt it felt like a slap. "And tell your father to come get his trash. I'm done with it. He made this mess. He can clean it up. He can come collect his pathetic, worthless daughter. You're his problem now." The line clicked dead. I stood frozen right there in Millennium Park. The sun was shining. Tourists were laughing. The world just kept turning. His words just echoed in my head. "Tell your father to come get his trash. His pathetic, worthless daughter." I was nothing to him anymore. Less than nothing. A piece of garbage to be thrown away. A problem to be passed off. The fury that had been simmering inside me just vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp certainty. This wasn't about saving my marriage or my pride. This was about survival. This was war. I pulled out the burner phone, the one from the deposit box. I didn't wait. I dialed the only number in its memory. It was answered on the first ring. The distorted voice was silent. "I'm not going to Geneva," I said, my own voice steady and cold as ice. "Tell my father the deal is off. Tell him I need a different kind of help now." I ended the call. I looked at the silver key in my palm, the one promising a quiet escape. Then I slipped it back into my pocket. It wasn't a key to a vault. It was a key to a fight, and I was just getting started. The cold clarity from Ethan's call was a drug. Fear was a weakness I couldn't afford, and self-pity was a trap. I had been reduced to a piece of garbage he wanted to throw away. And in that brutal, ugly moment, I found a strange kind of freedom. I had nothing left to lose except the fight itself. I didn't go back to the hotel. If Ethan knew about the care home, the hotel was compromised. I walked north, my mind sorting through options like a safe cracker. My father's warning echoed. They'll be watching. Vance was a shark, but Ethan was the snake, and the snake was in my home. I needed a new base of operations, somewhere he would never think to look. An idea started to form, a desperate and probably reckless one. I used cash from the accounts to buy a prepaid debit card at a corner store. In a tiny electronics shop, I bought a cheap tablet and a flash drive. At a resale shop, I found a pair of black jeans, a dark gray hoodie, and some worn-in sneakers, my new urban camouflage. I changed in a gas station restroom, tossing my designer clothes into the dumpster. I looked like a college student, totally anonymous. Then I went to the one place Ethan had legally and permanently thrown me out of, the storage unit. It was a grim, windowless building down by the river. The kid at the front desk barely looked up from his phone as he took the paperwork my lawyer had sent over. He pointed me toward Unit B13. The unit was a small, concrete box. Inside, stacked with a truly chilling indifference, were the pieces of my former life. My clothes were crammed into black garbage bags, my shoes in a tangled mess, photo albums, my grandmother's porcelain still wrapped in last week's newspaper, my architecture books, my yoga mat. It was a tomb for the person I used to be. Ethan hadn't just kicked me out, he'd tried to erase me. My whole life reduced to a few cubic feet of rented space. I didn't have time to mourn. I started digging, not for memories, but for weapons. In a box labeled office, I found my old laptop. It was password protected and probably already wiped by his IT department, but it was worth a shot. I took it. In another box, I found a small fireproof case where I kept our important documents. The key was on my old keychain, which Ethan now had. I used a screwdriver from a toolkit, also tossed in a box, to pry the lid open. My old passport useless now. My birth certificate, my degree from Northwestern, and at the bottom a small velvet pouch. Inside wasn't jewelry, but a silver thumb drive. My drive. In our first year of marriage, so full of love and a naive belief in partnership, I'd helped Ethan organize his home office. I was the tech-savvy one, with my background in digital design. I'd suggested backing up all his critical tax records, deeds, trust documents onto a secure, encrypted drive, just in case. He'd laughed and called me paranoid, but he agreed. "As long as you hold the key, my love," he'd said, kissing my forehead. I created the encrypted drive myself. The password was the coordinates of the restaurant where he proposed. I was such a sentimental fool. Later, as he became more secretive and guarded about his work, I forgot all about it. And he'd clearly forgotten he ever gave me this digital key to his entire kingdom. My hands were shaking as I plugged the silver drive into the tablet. I typed in the password. The drive opened. A file directory appeared. Clean, labeled folders, tax records, personal, Sterling Financial, property, trust agreements, correspondence, Vance. My breath caught in my throat. I opened the Vance folder. Most of it was boring stuff, meeting notes and calendar invites. But one file, labeled Project Icarus MOU, stood out. Icarus from the Greek myth, the son who flew too close to the sun on wax wings and came crashing down to Earth. A perfect name for a plan to destroy a rival. I opened it. It was a scanned PDF, a letter of intent. Not legally binding, but very explicit. It was dated 3 years ago, between Sterling Financial Holdings, a shell corp, and Vance Industries. The subject, a joint strategic initiative regarding Northwood Ventures. The language was all corporate doublespeak, but the meaning was crystal clear. The two firms agreed to coordinate their market intelligence and mitigate mutual exposure, basically a secret pact to work together to bankrupt their competitor. It laid out a shell corporation designed for funneling money into shadow startups. The digital signatures belonged to Julian Croft and Elias Vance. It wasn't hard proof of securities fraud, but it was a pact. It proved my husband had been partners with my father's mortal enemy for years, long before he ever proposed to me, before he whispered about our future, our family. The encrypted drive felt heavy in my palm. This was the key, but it didn't open the final door. It was the map of the crime, not the confession. I needed more. I needed this evidence of the pump-and-dump schemes my father had warned me about. I copied the ledger to the drive and a hidden micro SD card. I wiped the server access logs clean. I pocketed the evidence, the hardware. As I slid the bookshelf back into place, my burner phone buzzed. It was Alex, his voice clipped and urgent. "Eliza, plans have changed. Your father, he's done waiting. He's going to Julian's penthouse." "What? Why?" Julian called him personally, told him to come pick up his trash. My father. He would not take that insult lying down. A sudden, sharp pride burned in my chest. Where is he going?" "The Elysian. He's on his way." My blood turned to ice. "He can't. It's a trap." "Julian will have him arrested for trespassing. Or worse, Alex. He knows. He doesn't care. He said to tell you." 10 minutes, be watching." "Watching what?" "The beginning of the end," Alex replied, and the line went dead. 10 minutes. The penthouse was 45 minutes away in Chicago traffic. It was literally impossible. But my father wasn't a man who made idle threats. If he said 10 minutes, he meant it, and he wanted me as a witness. I slammed the false panel shut, sprinted out of the study, and ran. I hailed a taxi, pushing a crumpled 100 at the driver. "Lakeshore Drive, the Elysian. Get there in 15 minutes, and there's 200 more waiting for you." The driver, a weary man with eyes that had seen too much, just nodded and stomped on the accelerator. We shot through traffic with a brutal efficiency that echoed the chaos in my heart. I clutched the encrypted drive in my pocket like a prayer bead. 10 minutes. The city became a smear of light. What was his plan? He was out on bond, facing a lifetime in prison. A public scene with Julian could violate his release, sending him straight to Cook County. Was this his last grand self-destructive act, or something else? The drive felt hot. Project Icarus. The cab screeched to a halt before the glittering tower. I threw the money on the seat and bailed out. I ignored the opulent, marble-drenched residence entrance and went around to the service alley in the back. I'd used it 1,000 times for morning runs or to dodge photographers during some past scandal. The code was still the same, 10:08, Julian's birthday. Of course, I punched it in. The light turned green and the lock buzzed open. He never changed it. The arrogant fool. I took the clattering, greasy service lift to the penthouse floor. It opened into a bare utilitarian hall. The private service door to the apartment was right there. Another keypad. I entered the same birthday code. It let out a sharp beep, access denied. He'd changed this one. I was locked out, just one door away from the battle. But I knew this building. I'd wasted a year on the condo board. I knew about the emergency roof access ladder on the floor directly below, a post-9/11 retrofit. I took the service lift down one floor, found the maintenance closet, and located the panel. The key was with the building super, but I'd seen him open it. The lock was cheap. I used a small screwdriver from my purse, jimmied it open, and pulled the release. A section of the ceiling slid away, and a heavy aluminum ladder descended. I climbed, pushing out into the wind 60 stories above Chicago. The wind tore at my jacket. The view was beautiful and terrifying. I crawled to the edge overlooking the park and looked straight down. Our penthouse terrace was right below, a wide expanse of teak decking and designer furniture. The great room S floor-to-ceiling windows were like a brightly lit diorama, and inside I could see them all. Julian was pacing, phone glued to his ear, his face a mask of pure fury. Chloe was sitting on the arm of the sofa, looking anxious, twisting the strap on her purse, my purse, and then I saw him. My father. He wasn't dressed as a defendant. He wore a dark, perfectly tailored cashmere overcoat. He stood in the middle of the room, completely still. His hands were clasped loosely in front of him. He looked calm, almost regal. He didn't look like a ruined man. He looked like a king, inspecting a disloyal subject's castle and finding it tacky. Julian finished his call and started shouting, his gestures sharp and violent, but the thick glass silenced his rage.
My father didn't move.
He just waited for the tantrum to pass. Then my father's lips moved. A short, simple sentence. Julian's face contorted with even more rage. He stepped forward, jabbing a finger in my father's face. My father didn't flinch. He said something else, his expression never changing. This was the showdown, but it wasn't the one Julian had planned. My father wasn't pleading for my sake. He wasn't begging for mercy. He was passing sentence. I fumbled with my phone, opened the camera, and zoomed in. The image was unsteady, but I could see their faces perfectly. I hit record. Down on the street, something caught my eye. A car. No, not a car. A Bentley. A long, stately Mulsanne in a deep obsidian black. It pulled to a smooth stop under the building's awning. A uniformed chauffeur got out and stood by the door. Then another Bentley, a sleek Bentayga, glided in behind it. And another, a classic Continental. A silent, imposing procession of luxury. 6 Bentleys in total formed a neat, threatening line in front of my home. Chauffeurs emerged from each one, standing at attention. It was a display of power so bold, so completely out of place, it took my breath away. This wasn't some hired car service. These were icons, symbols of a wealth so quiet and deep it couldn't be touched by market crashes or federal charges. This was my father's reply. This was the tense minutes. Julian, in the middle of another tirade, must have seen my father's gaze shift to the window. He turned, following his look. I saw his face change. The anger dissolved into confusion, then into stunned disbelief. He walked to the window, staring down at the lineup of automotive power below. Chloe joined him, her hand flying to her mouth. My father hadn't arrived in a taxi or the back of a Federal 8 sedan. He'd arrived in a procession fit for royalty. The message was unmistakable. You think I'm broken? You think you've won? Look again. My father turned from the window and said something else to Julian. Julian spun around, his face now pale with a dawning, sick understanding. The script had been flipped. The predator had just found himself in the crosshairs. My father then glanced at his watch. A simple classic model, gave a slight, dismissive nod, and walked calmly toward the penthouse entrance. Not hurried, not chased out, but leaving of his own accord. He didn't look like a man being thrown out. He looked like a man concluding a distasteful meeting. Julian stood frozen, staring at my father's retreating back, then back at the Bentleys below. Chloe was clinging to his arm, saying something, her face etched with panic. The elevator doors in the foyer would be opening now. My father would be stepping inside. The trash had just been collected by a garbage truck made of solid silver and old money arrogance. I stopped recording. My hands were steady. The cold fury was gone, replaced by a soaring, almost giddy sense of vindication. He'd done it with nothing but sheer, brazen theater. My father had just rewritten the entire narrative in the space of 10 minutes. But the theater wasn't the substance. It was the cover, the distraction. While Julian was staring at the cars, while he was reeling from the psychological blow, he wasn't thinking about wiped servers or encrypted drives. I looked down at my phone. I had the recording. I had the ledger. I had the beginning of my case. But as I watched the first Bentley pull away from the curb, a new, more chilling thought occurred to me. My father's performance wasn't just for Julian. It was for me. He told me to be at the window. He'd wanted me to see that he wasn't defeated, that the Sterling name still had power, even if it was a different kind of power. He was showing me how to fight back. Not in the courtroom. Not yet. But in the theater of war, he was showing me that perception is a weapon and spectacle is armor. The last Bentley disappeared around the corner. The show was over. Down in the penthouse, Julian was still at the window. Chloe was trying to pull him away. He shook her off violently, his face a storm of humiliation and rage. He turned and slammed his fist down on the back of the sofa. The game had changed. The pathetic, worthless daughter he tried to throw away had a father who arrived in a motorcade of legends. In 10 minutes, that supposed bankrupt showed more raw power than Marcus had in his entire portfolio. I put the tablet in my bag. The wind on the roof was biting. I looked out over the city that had tried to crush me. Marcus thought he was calling my father to take out the trash. But Dad didn't come to collect me. He came to send a message to prove that the first step in any real war is to make your enemy doubt everything. I climbed back down, my mind already 3 moves ahead. The show was over. Now the real fight began. I had one memo. I needed the whole story. I had to get into Grayson's study. Reaching the service hall, my burner phone buzzed. I answered. The distorted voice was back. The performance went as planned. Your father's leverage has shifted. Your own situation is still dangerous. Marcus Thorne is cornered, which makes him furious and unpredictable. A cornered animal is the most vicious. The safe house is compromised. A new one is ready. I don't need a new safe house, I said, my voice low but steady. I need to get inside Arthur Grayson's townhouse tonight. A long silence crackled on the line. That is extremely ill-advised. The security is intense. Grayson is there now. The risks are mine, I replied. My father showed me how to attack his ego. Now I need to attack his bank accounts. Are you going to help me or not? Another beat of silence. Then the voice, completely flat. There is a charity gala at the Museum of Modern Art tonight. Grayson is a major donor. He will be there. His wife is away. He will probably return home alone between 10:30 and 11 p.m. His staff has Wednesday nights off. There is a 30-minute window from 11:15 to 11:45 p.m. when the house is empty, except for Grayson, who will be in his second-floor study, likely reviewing donations. The security system is a Vidian Shield Series 7. The code to disable it is 0915. My blood turned to ice. 0915, Marcus's birthday. The code he used for absolutely everything. A narcissist's tell. How do you know that? Grayson is a creature of routine who trusts his allies. The code was a foolish gesture of partnership. Marcus and Grayson, partners sharing a security code. The sick intimacy of that one stupid detail was more shocking than the entire memo. The study door is a physical Chubb lock. The key will be on Grayson. The locked desk drawer is a Malin safe drawer, model DX. It needs a key and a 4-digit combination. And the combination? We don't have it. You'll need to find it, or force it. The voice became grim. This operation has zero margin for error, Kennedy. If you're caught, your father can't help you. Grayson will call the police, and he will press charges. You will go to jail. Marcus will use it to finish the divorce and have you declared mentally unfit. This is a point of no return. I glanced down at my hands. They weren't shaking. Give me the address. The voice gave an address on East 79th Street, one of the most exclusive blocks in the city. A car will be waiting on 80th Street, engine on, from 11:30 p.m. It leaves at 11:46 p.m. precisely. If you are not in it, you are alone. Understood. One more thing. The voice hesitated for the first time. Your father is unaware of this call, or this plan. He would forbid it. This is your choice, your war. I know, I said. Thank you. I ended the call and stood in the grimy service hall, the building's machinery humming around me. I had a few hours. I needed gear. I needed a strategy. I needed to be someone else entirely. I wasn't Kennedy Ashcraft, the cheated wife. I wasn't Kennedy Ashcraft, the ruined heiress. For tonight, I had to be a ghost and a thief. The 10 minutes were done. My move. The hours before the gala seemed to stretch on forever. I used cash from my dwindling accounts to get a room in a motel near the Javits Center, paying for a week to seem normal. The room smelled like bleach and failure, but the door had a lock and the window faced a brick wall. It was perfect. I spent the afternoon gearing up. At a hardware store, I got a flashlight, a cheap set of lock picks that looked ridiculous, a roll of gaffer's tape, and thin latex gloves. At a thrift shop nearby, I found my costume, a simple black dress and a black wool coat, both plain enough to disappear on the Upper East Side. I added a small black clutch. I looked like 1,000 other wealthy, boring women in this city. I looked like no one. As dusk settled, I dressed. I twisted my hair into a tight knot at the base of my neck. Almost no makeup. My mother's diamond studs were the only connection to my old life. I put them in my ears. Their cold weight a strange comfort. I slipped the tablet and the thumb drive with the memo into a protected sleeve and tucked it inside my coat. My only weapons were information and guts. The lockpicks felt impossibly heavy in my clutch. I rode the subway to the Upper East Side, stepping out into the cold night air. The gala was a blaze of light a block away. I could see the red carpet, the popping camera flashes, the flood of fancy dresses and tuxedos going up the museum steps. I kept my distance. I circled the block, using the dark side streets until I reached East 79th. Grayson's townhouse was an old-world masterpiece, a 5-story limestone fortress on a big corner lot with a wrought iron fence, perfect ivy, and gleaming black shutters. It screamed powerful, untouchable money. Lights were on in the first and second floors. The study, I was told, was on the second floor, the room with 2 tall, thin windows facing a garden. I found a shadowed doorway across the street and prepared to wait. The chill seeped into my bones. Time crawled by. I watched cars dropping people off at other mansions, hearing the city's distant noise. My heart was beating like a trapped bird. This was insane. I was about to break into the house of one of the most powerful and brutal men in New York. All for what? A piece of paper that might not even be real. But it was about the principle of the thing. It was about taking something back. Marcus had taken my home, my reputation, my security. My father, his own way, had taken my innocence. Tonight, I would take something from them. I would steal their secrets. At 10:42 p.m., a dark Bentley Mulsanne pulled up. A driver in uniform jumped out and opened the back door. Arthur Grayson climbed out. He was a beast of a man, broad, with a huge mane of white hair and a face like a rock. He wore a tuxedo that looked too small for his shoulders. He didn't look like a supporter of the arts. He looked like a pirate who'd just won the museum in a back alley card game. He walked heavily up the steps, unlocked the front door, and went inside. My countdown began. I waited, forcing myself to take slow, deep breaths. The staff was gone. Grayson would be in his study. He'd pour a drink, check his messages. My window of opportunity was tiny and closing fast. At 11:17 p.m., I crossed the street, my shoes making no sound on the pavement. The block was quiet and still. I slipped through the wrought iron gate unlocked, thank God, and up the 5 stone steps to the massive black door. My mouth was bone dry. I saw the sleek metal keypad next to the door. Vidian Shield Series 7. I punched in the code, 0915. A soft green light blinked on. A faint click echoed from inside the door. I turned the heavy brass handle. It moved without a sound. The door swung open on perfect hinges. I was in. The foyer was huge. A black and white marble floor like a chessboard sat under a crystal chandelier the size of a small car. A grand staircase swept up into the darkness. The air smelled of lemon polish, old money, and faint cigar smoke. It was unnervingly quiet. I closed the door softly. Less than 30 minutes now. I moved quickly, every nerve firing. The house felt like a museum of things he'd conquered. Suits of armor, dark portraits of dead relatives, glass cases filled with mineral samples. This was the cave of a man who collected power. I found the study at the end of the second-floor hall. The door was solid oak with an ornate handle, and, just as I'd been told, a serious-looking Chubb deadbolt. Locked. This was the first test. I pulled the lockpick set from my clutch, my hands trembling. I had watched videos on it in the motel room. It seemed so simple. Insert the tension wrench. Feel for the pins with the pick. I fumbled, the pick slipping. A single drop of sweat rolled down my back. I took a breath, forcing myself to be calm. I tried again. I could feel the tiny metal pins inside. Little obstacles in my way. I probed. I lifted, one clicked. Then another. My entire world shrank to the feeling of cold metal in my gloved fingers, the tiny feedback it gave. The third pin set. The fourth went with a final satisfying snick. The deadbolts slid back. I turned the knob and slipped into the room, closing the door behind me. Grayson's study was a cave of mahogany and leather, with bookshelves from floor to ceiling. A massive desk sat in the center. A gas fire flickered in a huge marble fireplace. The room smelled of leather, peat smoke, and good scotch. On the desk was a half-full glass of amber liquid and a folded Financial Times. And there, built into the antique credenza, was the safe. A flush-mounted panel with a brushed steel finish, completely invisible until you knew where to look. It had a small, glowing keypad. It whispered secrets. I needed the 4-digit code. My husband Leo and his boss Julian shared everything. I prayed they shared this too. Our anniversary, 0915. Was it that obvious? Was my husband that predictable, that sentimental? I knelt, my belly pressing against my dress. I had to try. If I was wrong, if it triggered an alarm, it was over. But I had no other choice. My finger trembled as I reached for the keypad. 915. I hit enter. A sharp, negative beep. A single red light flashed. Wrong. My mind raced. What else? Leo's birthday, 1988. I tried it. 1988. Red light. The year they launched their firm. 2016. Red light again. Julian S.'s wife died years ago. I didn't know her birthday. A knot of panic tightened in my gut. I was burning time. I scanned the office, desperate for a clue. People always leave a trail. On his desk, beside a glass of whiskey, was a framed photo. A younger Julian Croft, beaming with pride at the helm of a beautiful sailboat, the Ariadne. He was a known sailing fanatic. The shelves were lined with racing trophies. The boat, his obsession. I looked closer at the picture. On the hull of the sailboat, the registration number was clear. SR60103. That was 5 digits. I only needed 4. Maybe the year it was built. I squinted at the photo's brass plate. 1993. I punched in 1993. Red light. Time was slipping away as my gaze swept the bookshelves, nautical charts, maritime histories, first editions. And then I saw it. On a low shelf set apart from the others was a simple wooden model of a dinghy, a child's toy, its paint faded, sitting on a little stand. Carved into its side in clumsy, childish letters were 2 words, Daddy's Navigator, and beneath it, a date, 10/22/98. A daughter's gift, October 22nd, 1998. 4 digits, month and day, 10/22. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely press the keys. 1022. A new tone chimed from the keypad. A green light. A soft click echoed from inside the credenza. The lock had disengaged. A sob of relief almost escaped my lips. I pulled the panel. The heavy safe door swung open. Inside, it was perfectly ordered. Binders and color-coded folders. I scanned the labels, my heart pounding against my ribs. Croft Holdings. Personal Finances. And then a simple manila folder with one typed word, Nightingale. My gloved fingers felt clumsy as I pulled it out. I laid it on the desk, clicking on my tiny penlight. It wasn't a file. It was a journal, handwritten in a tight, precise script that was definitely not Julian's. The entries went back 2 years, columns for dates, actions, payouts, and initials. My breath caught in my throat as I read. Oct 15. LC confirms supply chain weakness. JC short stock. March 16. LC provides R&D vulnerability report. Hostile bid prep begins. LC, Leo Collins, my husband. JC, Julian Croft, page after page. My father's company was being systematically dismantled from the inside. Leo wasn't just a partner. He was the saboteur. He'd fed Julian every secret, every weakness. He even helped Julian recruit a disgruntled engineer from my father's team. The quiet betrayals my dad could never prove, they were all here in black and white. The sums listed in the payout column were sickening. Millions. Next to one of the largest transfers, someone had scrawled a note in darker ink. Leo's nest egg. The bastard was funding our future by destroying my family. I grabbed my phone from my coat, my fingers flying as I powered it on. I started taking pictures. Page after page, the phone's flash felt like a lightning strike in the dark room. This was it. The evidence. The proof that would ruin them both. I was on the final page when I heard it. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway outside. My blood ran cold. I froze. The phone's light still fixed on the damning journal. A car door slammed. Heavy, deliberate footsteps crunched toward the house. Julian. He was home early. I snapped my phone off, plunging the room into darkness. I shoved the journal back into the folder, back into the safe. I pushed the door closed. It clicked shut just as I heard a key turning in the front door lock. There was no time to run, no place to hide. The office had glass walls on one side. The only window looked out over a lit patio. I did the only thing I could. I dropped to the floor and scrambled under the massive mahogany desk, curling into the knee-hole space, pulling my coat tightly over my pregnant stomach. The space was tight, smelling of lemon polish and old wood. The front door opened. The main hall lights flicked on, casting a brutal glare that bled under the desk. Heavy footsteps entered the house. I saw his expensive leather loafers move toward the bar cart, the clink of ice in a glass, the deep pour of whiskey. He was walking toward the office. His shoes stopped directly in front of me. I held my breath, my heart hammering so loud I was sure he could hear it. I could see the perfect crease in his trousers, the shadow of his large frame falling over me. He sat down. The leather office chair groaned under his weight. The desk vibrated. I was inches from his legs. If he so much as stretched, he would touch me. He took a long swallow of his drink. I heard him pick up the receiver of the desk phone. He dialed. "It's me," he said, his voice a low growl. "The old man's press conference is over." A pathetic spectacle. A pause. He was listening. To Leo. I knew it. "No, it changes nothing," Julian snarled. "Your father-in-law has guts, I'll give him that. But guts don't stop a bankruptcy filing. He's finished. And the girl, she's gone to ground. My man lost her after she left her parents' house, but she'll surface. They always do." Another pause. I could hear the faint, tinny murmur of Leo's voice on the other end. "Your divorce is the least of my worries," Julian snapped. "Get it done. Get her to sign the papers. If she won't, then we bury her right alongside her father. We'll plant something. Make her look complicit. The district attorney is a dear friend. She'll break after one night in a cell." My stomach turned to acid. They were going to frame me. Put me in jail while I was pregnant. "All the proof is right here in my desk," Julian said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The only copy. My insurance policy. Once her father is ruined and the girl is handled, we'll burn it. A little celebration. Until then, it stays right here." He chuckled, a deep, ugly sound. "Safe and sound. Now do your job. I want the final acquisition papers from their tech division ready by Friday." He hung up. He took another slow drink. I heard the soft scratch of a fountain pen. He was signing something. Then, complete silence. He was just sitting there, thinking, drinking. A single bead of sweat trickled down my forehead. The cramp in my leg was becoming unbearable. I didn't dare breathe. The phone and its photos felt like a bomb in my coat pocket. A death sentence if he found them. After what felt like an hour, he sighed. A heavy, exhausted sound. He pushed his chair back. The leather loafers turned. He stood up. He walked away from the desk, back toward the bar cart. I heard the clink of the decanter as he poured another drink. This was my chance. With his back turned, I had to go. Slowly, painfully, I began to untangle myself from under the desk. Every rustle of my coat, every tiny scrape of my shoe sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I made it to my hands and knees. Peeking out, I saw Julian at the bar, his back to me, staring out the window into the night. I rose into the low crouch. The doorway was 15 feet away. It felt like a mile. I took one cautious step. A floorboard beneath the oriental rug let out a loud, agonizing groan. Julian went still. I could see his reflection in the dark glass of the window, his head tilting slightly. Listening, I froze, a statue carved from pure fear. He didn't turn around. "I know you're there," he said, his voice perfectly calm, almost conversational. "The security system is silent. It sends an alert to my watch if the office is entered after it's been armed." My blood turned to ice. It was a trap. The whole thing, the empty house, the unlocked door a trap, and like an idiot, I walked right into it. Slowly, he turned around. He held his whiskey glass in one hand. In the other, he held his phone, the camera lens pointing directly at me. It looked like a weapon. "I was expecting a private investigator, maybe one of your father's desperate lawyers." His cold eyes scanned over me, taking in my black coat, my terrified expression. Then his gaze dropped to my stomach, to the unmistakable swell of my pregnancy. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "But you, the loving wife. I have to admit, I'm impressed. Foolish, but impressed." I couldn't speak. My mind was just a blank wall of terror. "Is that a new coat?" he asked. Taking a step closer. "Empty your pockets. Put everything on the desk." Slowly. I laid out the gear on the desk. The tablet, the burner phone, the clutch with my picks. He gestured with the gun, the phone. I slid the burner phone beside the tablet. "Now the coat. Take it off. Throw it over here." I shrugged off my coat, the chill of the room hitting my skin instantly. I tossed it toward him. It landed near his feet. He never looked down. His eyes stayed locked on me. "You came for the documents, didn't you? Julian said you were getting bold. I told him you were just a pampered princess." Seems I misjudged the famous Vance spirit. He stepped closer. The gun was now just 6 feet away. Open the tablet. I obeyed. The screen flared to life, asking for a passcode. What's the code? I froze. If he saw the pictures, girl, either you give me the code, or I shoot you in the leg and then call an ambulance. You'll be arrested from your hospital bed. How does that sound for a headline? My finger trembled as I typed in the simple password. The home screen appeared. The last app ID used was the camera. The thumbnail of the last photo, a clear shot of the ledger page detailing an offshore account, was sitting right there. Grayson's eyes narrowed. Bring it here. I picked up the tablet, my legs feeling weak. I took 2 steps toward him and held it out. As he reached for it with his free hand, his eyes dropped to the screen. I saw my opening. It wasn't a plan. It was pure, raw instinct. I didn't hand him the tablet. I swung it with all my might. Not at him, but at the crystal tumbler in his other hand. The tablet's edge connected squarely with the glass. It shattered. Whiskey and shards of crystal went everywhere. Grayson roared in surprise and pain, flinching back, his gun hand faltering. I dropped the tablet and lunged. Not for the gun, but for the one thing I could reach, the heavy crystal decanter on the bar cart. I grabbed it by the neck, spun, and swung. It hit the side of his head with a sickening, wet thud. Arthur Grayson's eyes rolled back in his head. He made a sound like a slow leak in a tire. The pistol clattered to the wood floor. He followed it down, collapsing like a felled tree, his heavy body shaking the floorboards. I stood over him, the decanter still in my hand, my breath catching in ragged, terrified gasps. He was out cold. A trickle of blood was already coming from his simple, mixing with the spilled whiskey on the Persian rug. I had actually knocked out Arthur Grayson. The thought was too big to even comprehend. I had to move. I snatched up my coat, the burner phone, and my clutch. I left the tablet. It was a liability. The pictures were probably on a cloud somewhere, but I couldn't waste the time. I grabbed the pistol from the floor. It felt cold, heavy, and alien in my hand. I shoved it into my coat pocket. Then it hit me, the ledger, the proof, the entire reason I was here. I ran to the desk, my fingers fumbling with the keypad. 4110. The drawer slid open. I grabbed the whole Project Nightingale folder, stuffing it into an inner pocket of my coat. I slammed the drawer shut. I glanced one last time at Grayson, a massive heap on the floor. He was starting to groan, his limbs twitching. He'd be awake soon. I ran. I flew down the grand staircase, through the marble foyer, and out the front door, not even bothering to close it. I hit the street at a dead sprint, my heels skidding on the pavement. I rounded the corner onto Park Avenue, and there it was, a black sedan idling by the curb, its exhaust puffing in the cold night air. The back door swung open as I got closer. I dove inside. Go, now. The car was already in drive, lurching forward before my door was even shut. I struggled to pull it closed, falling back against the leather seat, my whole body shaking in violent, uncontrollable waves. Leo was driving. He didn't look at me in the rearview mirror. You're bleeding. I looked down at my hands. They were scratched from the glass and speckled with Grayson's blood. It's not mine. The package? I patted the thick folder inside my coat. I got it. And the house? Grayson was there. I had to hit him with a decanter. He's unconscious. For the first time, Leo's stoic expression cracked. His eyebrows shot up. You knocked out Arthur Grayson? He didn't say it with fear, but with a strange kind of respect. Jesus. The old man is going to have a stroke when he finds out. Where are we going? I asked. The adrenaline crash starting to make me feel sick. Somewhere you can get cleaned up, and we can see exactly what you risked your life for. He glanced at me again, his gaze lingering on the gun-shaped bulge in my coat pocket. And you can tell me why you're carrying a pistol. I leaned my head back against the cool glass, watching the city lights blur into streaks. I did it. I got the evidence. I fought back. But as the shock faded, the reality of the consequences began to set in. I assaulted Arthur Grayson inside his own home. I stole from him. He was going to wake up. He would know it was me. He owns the police department. He owns the district attorney. This war wasn't just some metaphor anymore. It had just become very, very real, and I had just fired the first shot that drew blood. The 10-minute heist was over. The break-in was done. Now, the real storm was about to hit. The somewhere turned out to be a private terminal at Westchester County Airport, a different universe from some grimy motel. We went not to a hangar, but to a quiet, low building marked Executive Flight Services. Inside, it felt more like a modern hotel lounge than an airport. All quiet carpets, abstract paintings, and expensive furniture. A door marked Conference Room 3 opened into a small, windowless room with a table, chairs, and a security shredder in the corner. It was the kind of place for secret deals and signing awful documents. "Wait here," Leo said. "Don't touch a thing. I'll get a first aid kit." I sit into a chair, the weight of the entire night crashing down on me. I placed the thick manila folder on the glossy table. The Project Nightingale label practically glowed with a dark energy. I pulled Grayson's pistol from my coat, handling it like it was a poisonous snake, and set it next to the folder the 2 trophies from my night of crime. Leo came back with a small medical kit. Without a word, he took my hand and started cleaning the shallow cuts with an antiseptic wipe. The sting was sharp, and it brought me back to reality. "He'll be awake by now," I said, my voice sounding empty in the silent room. "He'll have called the cops. He'll have told them my name." "Probably," Leo agreed, his touch surprisingly gentle. "But he won't get the reaction he's expecting. Not right away." "Why not?" "He's Arthur Grayson." Because the silent alarm in his study wasn't just sent to his phone. It was routed through a third-party security firm, one your father's people have a relationship with. The 911 call from his house was automatically rerouted and delayed. The first responders will be told it was a malfunctioning alarm system. A false alarm. They'll file a report and leave. Grayson will be furious, but he'll have no proof you were ever there. Not yet. He'll have a monster headache and a story that nobody will believe without evidence. A socialite breaking into his house and attacking him with a decanter? It's going to sound like he was drunk and hallucinating. I stared at him. The level of planning, of infiltration, was just staggering. My father set this up, all of it. Your father believes in planning for every contingency, and in having insurance. Leo finished wrapping my hand. "Now, let's see what all that risk bought you." I opened the folder with the handwritten ledger. I spread the pages across the table. Leo pulled up a chair, his sharp eyes scanning the entries. He was silent for a long time, his finger tracing the columns, the dates, the initials, the dollar amounts. His expression got darker with every page he turned. "This is it," he said at last, his voice a low growl. "This is conspiracy to commit massive securities fraud, wire fraud, racketeering. It looks like Thorne wasn't just some source. He was a partner. This ledger proves he was directing the whole scheme, divvying up the profits." He pointed to the offshore account entry. "That's especially bad. It establishes a clear motive. Premeditation. This isn't just business, it's personal. And it's deeply illegal." "Will it be enough?" I asked, the lawyer's daughter in me taking over. "It's handwritten. There's no digital footprint. They could claim it's a fake, a fantasy. It was in Gray's safe in his study, and we have witnesses who can place Thorne and Grayson together constantly. The memo from your flash drive gives the outline. This," he said, pointing at the ledger, "provides all the ugly details. It's a complete roadmap for any prosecutor. But more importantly, it's leverage, the kind of blackmail material that can ruin empires." "So what's our next move?" The question just hung there in the quiet room. The clear answer was to go to the authorities. But the authorities, as Grayson himself had bragged, were in his pocket. Could we actually trust them? We don't do anything with it. A new voice came from the doorway. Not yet. I turned, and there he was. My father. He looked older than I remembered. The lines around his eyes cut deeper, but he stood tall. He was wearing a simple dark sweater and pants, not the power suit from the office or the tailored coat from his penthouse. He looked like a man who had finally taken off a mask. His eyes found me first, searching for any injury, then flooding with a relief so deep it made my throat ache. Then his gaze fell to the ledger on the table and to the gun lying next to it. His expression hardened. You went to Grayson's house. It was not a question. His voice was quiet, but it was shaking with a controlled rage I had never, ever heard him direct at me. You told me not to, I said, meeting his eyes, my own defiance flaring up to meet his anger. You told me to run away to Zurich. You threw a party to make me feel better. But you never gave me a weapon to fight back, so I went and found one myself. I gave you a way to live, he snapped back, stepping into the room. A safe, clean life, far away from all this. Not a way to get yourself killed by breaking into the home of a man who would snap your neck and call it an accident. What were you thinking, Ava? This wasn't a joke. That drive, I pointed a shaky finger at it. If they'd found me with it, my God. I did what I had to do, I snapped, standing up. Julian had a file on me. He was going to frame me. Dad, he and Silas, they were going to plant fake records, make me an accomplice, send me to prison. What was I supposed to do? Run to the Caymans and read about my own arrest in the news. The awful truth hung between us. My father closed his eyes, a wave of agony crossing his face. When he opened them, the anger was gone, replaced by a tired, endless sorrow. I failed you completely. I built this monster and I left you alone to face him. You didn't leave me alone, I said, my voice cracking. You left me a key. You left me Elias. You came to the penthouse. You showed me. I searched for the words. You showed me the theater of it. The power of a bold play. Well, this is my play. I slapped my hand on the printed documents. I'm not running and I'm not hiding. Not anymore. My father looked at me, a new kind of respect in his eyes. He nodded slowly, as if accepting the inevitable. All right. He walked to the table, pulled out a chair, and focused on the papers. Then we fight, but we fight smart and we use the truth. The whole truth. He looked at Elias. Is the room clean? Swept an hour ago. Jammers are on. We're invisible. My father took a deep breath. The bankruptcy, the fraud. It's real, Ava. The losses are real. I cut corners. I faked reports to get new loans to pay off old debts. It's the oldest sin in real estate. I was arrogant. I thought I could build my way out of it. My heart sank. So that was it. Simple, ugly truth. But he continued, his voice getting stronger. It wasn't just a bad deal in a vacuum. I was under attack, a calculated, coordinated business assault. Silas, with Julian as his mole, was running a sabotage campaign on Hayes' properties. They bribed city inspectors. They filed bogus lawsuits to delay our projects. They lobbied the zoning board to deny our permits. They planted negative articles. They poached my best architects. They manufactured a credit crisis. They forced me into the corners I cut. He pointed to the drive. This is the log of that assault. They didn't just profit from my failure. They engineered it. They are the direct cause of the fraud the DEA is investigating. I am guilty of bad judgment, of desperation. They are guilty of malice, conspiracy, and corporate espionage. The world shifted again. It wasn't a simple stories of a failed tycoon. It was a stories of a war, of a king being overthrown by a deliberate, vicious siege. Why didn't you tell anyone, the DA, the FBI, and say what? My father's laugh was bitter. That the big bad wolves were picking on me without any proof? It sounds like the whining of a sore loser. This drive is the proof, but I couldn't get to it. Silas kept it as leverage against Julian, or maybe as a trophy. My only move was to force their hand, to let them think they'd won. The bankruptcy filing, I said, as understanding dawned. A controlled demolition. He nodded. I saw the indictment was coming. The investigation was unavoidable, so I steered it. I filed for Chapter 11 to trigger a freeze on everything, to bring all the liars into the light. I gave up control to a court-appointed trustee because a trustee has powers I no longer had. The power to subpoena, to investigate all sides, not just Hayes' properties. I took the hit, the public shaming, to create a contained environment where the whole truth could come out. It's a Hail Mary, a final, desperate play. I stared at him, awe and horror mixing. He'd sacrificed his reputation, his fortune, his freedom as a strategic move in a bigger war. And the classic cars. The 10-minute visit? Theater, as you said, he admitted with a faint, tired smile. But necessary theater. I had to show Julian, and more importantly, show you that I wasn't broken, that the Hayes name still carries power, even if that power is currently in the form of antique cars. I had to make Julian doubt, to make him panic. A panicked enemy makes mistakes. And he looked at me, his eyes gentle. I had to remind you whose daughter you are. You're not a victim. You're a Hayes. We don't back down. The pieces were crashing into place, a terrifying and thrilling mosaic. So, what now? We take this to the district attorney? Not yet, my father said, his expression turning shrewd, calculating. The old Donovan Hayes, the deal-maker, was back in his eyes. We have the drive. They don't know we have it. Right now, Silas is furious and confused, but he thinks he's still in charge. Julian is arrogant and thinks he's about to be rid of you for good. We have the element of surprise. We use it. How? We set a meeting, a negotiation for the divorce. I blinked. What? After everything, you want me to negotiate with him? I want you to make him an offer he can't possibly accept while wearing a wire. And with the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida listening in on a live feed. The audacity of it took my breath away. You can arrange that? The trustee handling the bankruptcy is a former federal judge named Maria Santos. She is fiercely independent, famously thorough, and has a deep dislike for Silas Vance dating back to a land deal in the 90s. I've already had a preliminary, hypothetical conversation with her. She is receptive to new evidence that would assist in the full and fair administration of the estate, especially evidence of a conspiracy to devalue that estate. She has contacts at the Public Integrity Unit. They would be very interested in a case involving a plot to manipulate markets and defraud lenders, especially with a billionaire and a tech celebrity at the center. It was a breathtakingly bold, dangerous play, using the divorce, my personal devastation, as the bait in a federal sting operation. He'll never agree to meet with me. Not after the fight, not after your visit. He'll only communicate through lawyers. He'll meet, my father said, a cold certainty in his voice, because the offer will come from your new lawyer, and it will be an offer of silence. My new lawyer? The door to the conference room opened again. The woman who entered was in her late 50s, with a sleek, dark bob, sharp, intelligent eyes behind minimalist glasses, and an aura of calm, formidable authority. She wore an exquisitely cut white pantsuit. I recognized her immediately from the pages of Miami Magazine and the Society columns. Isabella Rossi, nicknamed the Shark. She was the most feared divorce attorney in Florida. A legal assassin who represented the ultra-wealthy in battles where the sums were astronomical and the secrets were nuclear. She was famously selective, famously expensive, and famously unbeatable. Miss Hayes, she said, her voice cool, melodic, a pleasure under the circumstances. I'm Isabella Rossi. I'll be representing you. I was stunned. How? I owe your father a favor, she said simply, setting a slim leather briefcase on the table. A rather significant one, and I despise Julian Croft. He's a smug, misogynistic pig who thinks his money makes him invincible. I've been waiting for a chance to take him down a notch. This will do nicely. She opened her briefcase, withdrawing a single sheet of paper. This is a proposed settlement agreement. The terms are as follows. You will agree to a no-fault divorce. In return, Mr. Croft will immediately sign over to you clear title to the waterfront mansion on Star Island, unencumbered. He will also transfer to you the sum of $50 million from his personal accounts as a one-time payment. In exchange, you will sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, forever waiving your right to speak about your marriage, your father's business, or any knowledge you may have of Mr. Croft's business dealings. I almost laughed. It was absurd, insulting in its audacity. He'll never agree to that. It's a fantasy. Of course it is, Isabella said, a razor-thin smile touching her lips. That's the point. It's an opening offer so outrageous it will infuriate him. He'll demand a meeting to laugh in your face, to intimidate you, to show you who's still in charge. He'll want to see you beg. He'll want to relish his victory. That's when we spring the trap. The wire, I said. Precisely. We'll have the meeting here in this secure facility. The U.S. Attorney's Office will monitor remotely. You will wear a device. You will goad him. You will reference the drive, the sabotage, Silas. You will present him with a copy of an incriminating email from the drive. You will accuse him of conspiring to destroy your family. You will give him a chance to incriminate himself. Knowing Julian, his arrogance will do the rest. And if he doesn't take the bait, if he's smart... Isabella's smile didn't waver. Then we proceed to Plan B. We leak the drive's contents to the Miami Herald. We file a civil RICO lawsuit against Croft and Silas, with the drive as Exhibit A. We unleash a media firestorm that will make his life and his company untenable. The criminal investigation will follow. Either way, he loses. This meeting is simply the quicker, more satisfying method. I looked at my father. He gave a slight nod.
Your move.
This was it, the pivot point. I could take the passport and the bearer bonds and vanish. Or I could step into the ring with a wire and a script and try to bring down the man who broke me. There was no choice. Not really. When? I asked, my voice steady. Isabella glanced at her watch. My lawyer will contact Robert Miller this afternoon. The offer's already been sent. Given the circumstances and Julian's ego, he'll demand a face-to-face meeting by tomorrow. We have to get you ready. We need to plan your every word, your every move. We need to make you the perfect bait. She eyed my simple dress, my tired eyes, the faint bruise on my arm. First, let's get you into something that screams grieving daughter, not a gold digger. David, the safe house is ready, David said. I've laid out some clothes. I got to my feet. The weight of the dossier, the baby, the plan. It was crushing. But for the first time since my father's collapse, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt like I was finally holding the gun, pointed right at the heart of the monster. My father stood up too. He came to me and put his hands on my shoulders, his grip surprisingly strong. You don't have to go through with this, Amelia. The London apartment is still waiting. It's a quiet life, a safe one. I met his gaze, the eyes of a man who built an empire and then watched it burn. You didn't raise me to be safe, Dad. You raised me to build. A sad, proud smile touched his lips. He pulled me into a tight, quick embrace, then go and tear his world apart. I followed Isabella and David from the study, leaving the dossier and the safety deposit key on the desk as evidence for the DA's office. I finally understood what my father had been trying to tell me. The penthouse wasn't the power. The offshore accounts weren't the power. The power was the will to fight back. The power was holding the ugly truth in your hand. The power was turning your own pain into a weapon and a trap. The last few days were just the prelude. The main act was about to start. The safe house was a minimalist condo overlooking the harbor. The clothes chosen for me were a different kind of armor, a simple, elegant navy blue dress, a cashmere cardigan, and simple flats. No jewelry, not even my wedding ring. The look was composed, intelligent, and deadly serious. It was the uniform of a woman who was past the point of grief and was now in the cold, hard business of justice. Isabella prepped me for 3 straight hours. We sat at a glass table, the dossier and a flash drive between us, like what weapons. "Forget how you feel," she said, her voice sharp. "The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak, they're weaknesses. He will try to use them against you. He will insult you, gaslight you, and remind you of every time you felt small. Your only emotions now are quiet disdain and absolute certainty. You are not there to beg for scraps. You are there to deliver a consequence." She made me memorize the script. I was to be calm, direct, and completely devastating. The scene is the conference room. You are already seated. He enters, expecting you to be a mess. You do not get up. Your opener is, "Julian, thank you for making the time. Please sit." Then you say, "I've considered your offer. It's insulting. So I've prepared an alternative." You slide the new settlement agreement across the table. When he gets angry, you say, "This isn't a negotiation, it's a choice. You can sign this, and our divorce and your criminal conspiracy with Chloe Vance can remain a private matter. Or you can refuse, and I will file this." You then slide the North Tower dossiers next to the agreement. With the bankruptcy court, the SEC, and the district attorney's office, by the end of the day, the complete financials detailing your illegal trades will be sent next. Key phrases to use are corporate espionage, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Never say you ruined my family. Say you engaged in a coordinated scheme of industrial sabotage to bankrupt a competitor. It's about his crimes, not your pain. If he threatens you, you say, "Any attempt to intimidate me or my family will be considered witness, tampering, and obstruction of justice. For my own protection, this conversation is being recorded." That's the trigger. Mentioning a recording, even if it's a bluff, will either shut him down or his arrogance will make him talk even more, thinking he can spin it later. We ran the scene over and over. I practiced the neutral, steady tone, the deliberate way I would move, how to keep my hands calm on the table. Isabella was a brutal coach. "Less emotion. You're giving a weather report. Better. Don't lean in. You're not asking, you're telling." During a quick break, David came in with a tiny sophisticated device, a microphone no bigger than a cufflink. He fastened it as a pin on my cardigan. "It's voice activated," he said. "The range is the entire floor, perfect clarity. The DA's team is in the suite next door. They will hear everything. An armed federal marshal is in this room, behind that smoked glass." He pointed to a large pane of dark glass on the wall I thought was just decoration. "For your protection. If he makes any physical move, she will be in the room in a second." "Will he be armed?" I asked, the memory of his temper flashing in my mind. "He'll be scanned and searched by building security downstairs. Standard procedure here. He'll be unarmed." But Amelia David looked me right in the eye. "The most dangerous thing he has is what he knows about you. He will go for your weakest spot. Your job is to not have one." At 3:15, Isabella's phone vibrated. She listened, just said, "Understood," and ended the call. "He's on his way." Robert Miller just confirmed. "Julian will be here at 4. He's coming by himself. No lawyers. He said he wants to handle his hysterical wife personally." She let a small, cold smile appear. His arrogance. It's always their fatal flaw. The last few minutes felt like a strange dream. I was dressed, wired for sound and rehearsed. I sat by myself in the conference room, looking at the woman in the smoked glass. I barely knew her. She was composed, cold, and ready. The ghost of the woman who cried in her father's office was gone. At 3:58, the door swung open. Julian walked in. He was, as always, perfect. In expensive gray suits, a crisp open-collared shirt, the casual look of a man who owns the world. He glanced around the plain room with a sneer, as if its modesty offended him. His eyes finally stopped on me. He was expecting, I'm sure, to see a broken woman. Someone ruined by the past few weeks, pale with fear, with begging in her eyes. He didn't see that. His confidence faltered for a half-second, replaced by a flash of confusion, which he quickly covered with his usual arrogance. "Amelia," he said, staying near the door. "You look functional. I'm impressed. I half expected you'd be checked into a spa by now, trying to forget your family's spectacular failure." Quiet disdain. I motioned to the chair across from me. "Julian, thank you for coming. Please sit." He paused, thrown off by the calm, by the control. He closed the door and took the seat, leaning back and crossing his... A perfect picture of smug power. "So, Isabella Romano, a dramatic choice. Must be expensive. I hope your father's secret savings are covering her fees. Then again, I hear she's taken on more interesting payment plans. I wonder what you had to trade." I let the insult die in the air. I put my hands flat on the polished table. "I have reviewed your offer. It is unacceptable." He let out a sharp laugh. "Unacceptable? Darling, it's a fortune. $500,000 to walk away from a marriage that was simply a merger. One that's no longer profitable. You should be sending me a thank you note." "I'm prepared to offer you an alternative," I said, my voice unchanged. I slid Isabella's single-page settlement proposal across the table. He picked it up, his eyes scanning it, the smirk on his face freezing, then curdling into pure, astonished rage. He read it a second time, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the page. He looked up at me, his face a mask of cold fury. "Have you lost your mind? Is this some kind of sick joke? The penthouse? 50%? Have the last few weeks finally cracked that fragile little mind of yours?" "This is not a negotiation," I said, my voice even reciting the words, but feeling the power in them. "It's a choice. You can sign this, and our divorce, and your criminal conspiracy with Chloe Vance will be handled privately. Or you can refuse, and I will file this." I slid the printout of the North Tower dossier to sit next to the settlement, with the SEC and the district attorney, by market close today. "The full ledger detailing your illegal acts will follow." The color vanished from his face. He stared at the dossier, at the familiar letterhead, the damning subject line. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a pale, tight-lipped shock. "What is this? Where did you get this?" "Where I got it doesn't matter. What matters is that it's real, and it's a detailed account of your 2-year plot with Chloe Vance to destroy my father's company. Industrial sabotage designed to trigger a hostile takeover. Wire fraud. Racketeering." He jumped to his feet, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You have no idea what you're talking about. This is nonsense. It's a fake. And your brother's pathetic plan to ruin my father." I didn't even blink. I just stayed in my chair, looking right up at him. "Is that why there's a file on your server called Project Nightingale, Julian? Is that your slush fund for Sophie?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He stumbled back. He knew that I knew. That specific, humiliating detail just shattered his composure. He expected a sobbing, pregnant wife with empty threats. He didn't expect an architect who had the blueprints to his downfall. His shock twisted into a nasty, focused rage. He slammed his fists on the table, his face just inches from mine. I could smell the cologne I used to love. Now it just smelled like betrayal. "You stupid," he'd hissed, the charming facade gone, revealing the snake underneath. "You think you can blackmail me? You have nothing. You are nothing. That file, if it's even real, is on a private server you will never access again. And this," he grabbed the settlement offer from the table, tore it into shreds, and let the pieces fall like confetti, "is useless. My legal team will have you declared mentally unstable. I will get a restraining order. I'll bury you under so many lawsuits you'll wish you'd just taken the money and disappeared." This was it. Any attempt to intimidate me, frame me, or further involve my father's case will be considered witnessed tampering. I said, my voice steady, even though my heart was about to pound out of my chest. I looked over at a large, framed blueprint on the wall, then back at him. Just so you know, this entire conversation is being recorded. He followed my eyes to the blueprint. The understanding hit him, followed by a wild, reckless anger. He laughed, a raw, ugly sound. Recorded? You're bugging me? That's illegal, you idiot. My lawyers are going to have a field day with this. It's inadmissible. You just committed a felony. I'm not the one who's going to be charged with a felony, Julian, I said, letting a bit of ice finally slip into my tone. The recording is for my safety. The real evidence is in that file. And with the city official, you and Ethan bribed. What was his name again? Oh, right, Peterson. His tough guy act just crumbled. Peterson. I had named a name from his secret files, proof I had seen it all. You're bluffing, he snarled, but there was no power behind it. It was more like a desperate hope. Am I? I reached into the portfolio on the table. Not the whole file, just one piece of paper. I pulled out a high-resolution printout of an email exchange. It clearly showed the payment to Peterson, with Julian's own initials authorizing it. I slid it across the table. He stared at it. The blood drained from his face. He saw his own words, the damning details. His hands started to shake. He was a man watching his empire crumble. Where? He whispered. How? Your brother has a very loose definition of data security, I said, and you have a terrible habit with passwords. August 12th? Really, Julian? The launch date for Vance Tower? You use it for everything. It's just sad. The final insult. His own ego, the date of his greatest triumph, was now his undoing. It broke him. The rage came back. But this time it was a trapped animal's fury. He lunged across the table, not for me, but for the email, swatting it and the torn papers to the floor. It's meaningless. It's hearsay. It's the crazy talk of a ruined old man and his hormonal, delusional daughter. Nobody will believe you. I am Julian Vance. I own half of Chicago. You're a nobody. He was screaming now, spittle flying from his lips, his perfect hair a mess. This was the real him, the monster behind the billion-dollar smile. Your power is a fantasy, Julian, I said, standing up to meet his rage with my own icy calm. It was built on bribes and my father's misery. And it all ends today. You have a choice. Sign these papers, walk away with what's left of your life, or you can fight me, and I will use every single piece of this to see you in a state prison wearing an orange jumpsuit. Your powerful friends won't take your calls from inside Joliet. He stared at me, breathing hard, his eyes darting around the room, panicked, trapped, and out of moves. The sheer size of the trap was finally sinking in. The bug, the agents next door, the files, the email. And then something in him shifted. The anger didn't vanish, it just got colder. It turned into something much more sinister. A cruel, calculating look came into his eyes. He straightened his tie. A weak attempt to get his dignity back. You know, he said, his voice now a venomous whisper. There is a third option. I just stayed silent. I watched him. We could just call this a draw. He took a step toward me. I didn't move an inch. You dropped this madness. You sign my papers. You take the money. You move to Europe. And I make sure your father doesn't spend the rest of his days in a cage. I have pull with the DA's office. I can guarantee him a deal. A year, maybe 2, probation at worst. He'd be home before the baby is born. You can have your father back. All it will cost you is your pride. And this? He waved a hand around the room at the hidden camera. This childish need for revenge. He was offering me a deal with the devil. My father's freedom for my silence. It was a brilliant, evil move. It attacked the one weak spot he knew I had left. My love for my dad. I felt my lawyer's careful instructions start to fade. This wasn't part of the plan. This was real. My revenge, or my father's last chance at a decent life. I looked at this man, this monster, who knew exactly where to twist the knife. And I saw a pathetic gambler on his last desperate bet. You don't have that kind of leverage anymore, Julian, I said. and I could hear the absolute certainty in my own voice. Because by the time you walk out of this room, you won't have a story to sell. The Chicago Tribune will. The state's attorney will. Your friends at City Hall will be too busy pretending they've never met you. You have nothing to trade. You are bankrupt of money, of power, and of options. The cruel look in his eyes died, replaced by a deep, empty terror. He knew I could see right through him. He had nothing left. The door to the conference room swung open. Not the main door, but a hidden one by the blueprint on the wall. A woman walked in. She was in her 40s, with a stern face and her hair pulled back tightly. She wore a dark suit with a badge clipped to her belt. Two serious-looking men in cheap suits stood behind her. "Julian Vance," the woman said, her voice completely flat and professional. Julian spun around. "Who the hell are you?" "Special Agent Miller, Illinois Public Integrity Unit." She held up her badge for him to see. "We've been monitoring this conversation. We have some questions for you about the Vance Tower permits and your brother, Ethan Vance. You're not under arrest. Not yet. But we need you to come with us to our downtown office for an interview." Julian just stood there, frozen, his mouth hanging open. He looked from the agent to me, to the torn papers scattered on the floor. The reality of 3 state investigators was like a bucket of ice water to the face. You can't." "I want my lawyer," he stammered. "Of course," Agent Miller said, completely unfazed. "You can call him from the car. He can meet us at the Thompson Center. Now, please come with us." One of the other agents took a step forward, a clear, unspoken signal that it was time to go. Julian's shoulders just collapsed. The fight was completely gone. He walked like a man in a trance. He never looked at me again. He just shuffled out of the room between the 2 agents, a fallen king being led away from his castle. The door clicked shut behind them. The silence in the room was deafening. I slowly sank back into my chair, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me. The adrenaline that had kept me going for the past half hour just disappeared, leaving me shaking and empty. The side door opened again. My lawyer, Isabel, came in, followed by my father. My dad's face was pale, but his eyes were shining with a fierce, triumphant pride. "You were incredible," Isabel said, and for the first time, I heard real respect in her voice. "The offer he made about your father, that was a surprise move. Your answer was perfect. You didn't fall for it. You took him apart." "He's not arrested?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Not yet," my father said. He came and stood next to me, placing a warm hand on my shoulder. "They'll question him, show him the evidence we gave them. Then they'll offer him a deal. Testify against his brother Ethan in exchange for a lighter sentence. He'll take it. Scared men always do. The point was never just to get Julian. It was to use him to bring down the whole corrupt machine. The state's attorney will be reviewing your father's case with this new evidence," Isabel added. "It provides critical context. It proves he was a victim of coercion and a setup. It doesn't erase what happened, but it completely changes the story. The sentencing, it will be different now. There's a real chance for leniency, maybe even getting the charges dropped entirely. The goal is no longer just getting by. It's about getting justice." Justice. It was a word I had forgotten how to even think about. My father spoke up. "The car is waiting downstairs. We should go before the press finds out Julian Vance was just escorted out by state investigators. Your location needs to stay quiet." I nodded, found my strength, and stood up. I looked at the table, the torn memo, the photo on the floor, the battlefield. It was finally over. The fighting, the fear, the constant walking on eggshells around Marcus Thorne. But as I followed them out, a new feeling settled in, warmer and more solid than triumph. It was peace. Not the peace of surrender, but of closure. The peace of knowing that Monster was just a weak, terrified man. The peace of winning the only battle that mattered, the one for my own soul. The ledger was in the hands of the FBI. Marcus was in the back of a federal agent's car. The divorce suddenly seemed like the smallest of my problems. The real accounting had begun, and for once, I was the one holding the books. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind, all happening in near total secrecy. I wasn't in some motel. I was moved to a spacious, sunlit penthouse in a doorman building in Tribeca, owned by a shell corporation. The trail was so tangled that even Leo admitted he'd lost it. "A gift," he grunted, "from your father's friends. Think of it as back pay." The view was of the Hudson River, a vast expanse of water and sky that felt like freedom after the suffocating canyons of the Upper East Side. I became a ghost in the machine of justice. I gave my official sworn statement to the SS Attorney's Office with Victoria Sterling right beside me. I turned over the original ledger, the USB drive, and the photographs. I identified the handwritten notes. I was source A in the legal papers. My name blacked out from public records. The case against Marcus Thorne and Arthur Grayson was being built with quiet, ruthless efficiency. The news broke not with a bang, but in a series of controlled explosions. First, the Walsall Street Journal. Hedge fund manager Marcus Thorne subpoenaed in Ashcraft probe. Sources cite cooperation deal. The article hinted at a much wider conspiracy. Marcus's handsome face, now looking gaunt in a grainy photo outside the federal courthouse, was splashed all over the business section. Thorne Capital froze investor withdrawals. The vultures were circling his fund. Then came the New York Times. Tycoon Arthur Grayson, targeted in federal investigation for market manipulation. It reported that the Ashcraft Capital bankruptcy trustee had handed over major evidence of a predatory short-selling Sam campaign to the Justice Department. Grayson's lawyers furiously denied it, calling it a smear campaign, but they sounded panicked. His stock dropped 15% in one day. My own life became a footnote. The paparazzi disappeared from my building. I was no longer the tragic heiress. I was a potential witness, hidden by cautious silence the media gives to those who might face a grand jury. One afternoon, a month after the showdown at Teterboro, a courier delivered a simple cream-colored envelope to my apartment. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper. K. He took the deal. Full confession. On the record, he's giving them Grayson, the bribes, the whole scheme. He'll serve 18 to 24 months in a minimum security facility pending sentencing. His testimony is the nail in the coffin. Grayson will fight, but it's over. The old bull is being led to the slaughter. Thought you'd want to know. The penthouse deed is being transferred to an LLC in your name. The title is clear. It's yours. Do with it what you will. V.S. I held the note, recognizing the elegant initials of Victoria Sterling. So Marcus had folded. He chose to save himself over loyalty, just as we knew he would. The divorce fund was now evidence, not an escape plan. The penthouse, the site of my greatest humiliation, was now my property. The irony was so perfect it felt like a cosmic joke. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a quiet, profound sense of justice. A balance restored. Then the intercom buzzed. "Hey, Miss Smith, a Sophia Reed to see you." The doorman used the bland, fake name I had given him. My heart, which I thought had turned to stone where she was concerned, gave a painful, shocking lurch. "Send her up." I had no idea what to expect. Tears, excuses, more venom. Sophia looked smaller. The blazing, brittle confidence was gone. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair in a messy ponytail. She looked like a grad student, not a society queen. She stood in my doorway, her eyes taking in the bright modern space. The river view, all the proof of a life rebuilt without her. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small. I nodded, stepping back. I didn't offer her a drink. I just waited. She drifted to the window, looking out. "It's a nice view. Different. It's honest," I said. She flinched. After a long moment, she turned. I don't know why I came. To see you, I guess. To see if you were okay." "I'm fine, Sophia. I know. I've been following everything. She wrapped her arms around herself. Marcus, he's a monster. I see that now. I think I always knew on some level. But I wanted what he had, what you had, the certainty, the power. You wanted the spoils, I corrected, my voice cold. You didn't want to build anything, you just wanted to take it. She didn't deny it. She just nodded, a tear smudging her makeup. Yes, I did. And I was a fool. He used me, just like he used you. I was a weapon against you, and a piece of arm candy. And now that he's in trouble, he has thrown me to the wolves. The FBI, they've interviewed me. They asked about the Bahamas, about the things he said. I don't think I'm in trouble. But my name is in their files. It's over. The life I wanted, it's gone. And I have no one to blame but myself. I watched her, this woman I had once loved like a sister, now a stranger trembling in my living room. The rage was gone, burned out completely. All that was left was a weary pity. What do you want from me, Sophia? Forgiveness. No, she said, shaking her head fiercely. I don't deserve that. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Not for the consequences, but for the betrayal, for the cruelty. The things I said in the garage were evil. I was so eaten up with jealousy I couldn't see straight. You were my friend, and I destroyed it for a man who saw us both as things to be used. She looked at me, her eyes raw. I'm leaving the city, going back to Rhode Island. My mother's not well. I'm going to help. It's a good excuse to disappear. I said nothing. The silence stretched, filled with the ghosts of 1,000 lunches and 100 shared secrets. A friendship that had been real once before it was poisoned. I hope you find some peace, Sophia, I said finally. It was the most I could give. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a release. She nodded, a fresh wave of tears falling. Thank you. She turned to go, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, you were always the stronger one. I just hated you for it. And then she was gone. I stood at the window, watching the river flow, carrying the junk of the city out to sea. One last tie to the old life, cut clean. The final meeting with my father happened at the Lell Hotel, in his suite. The legal case was moving forward. His cooperation had completely changed the equation. The charges had been renegotiated. He would plead guilty to 1 count of securities fraud. The guidelines suggested 12 to 18 months, likely in a low-security camp. There would be massive restitution paid from the assets preserved in Zurich, which he was now turning over to the bankruptcy trustee. He was giving it all up, the money, the name, the freedom, but he was keeping his life and a future. We sat on a small balcony overlooking the city. He looked tired, but at peace. The penthouse is yours, he said. You should sell it. The money, with what's left, will be more than enough to start over. Clean, no shadows. I'm not selling it, I said. He looked at me, surprised. Why on earth not? That place is a tomb of bad memories. Exactly, I said. It's a trophy, my trophy. I am going to sell it, but not publicly. I'm going to auction it, and every penny is going to fund a foundation. The Ashcraft Financial Justice Initiative. To give legal aid to investors cheated by men like Grayson and Marcus. To support whistleblowers. To teach financial literacy in vulnerable communities. My father stared at me, his eyes wide. Then a slow, proud smile spread across his face. You're turning the poison into the antidote. I'm turning a liability into an asset, I said, smiling back. You taught me that. He reached across the table and took my hand. I taught you the mechanics. You, my darling girl, learned the soul of it. I am so unbelievably proud of the woman you've become. Through all this horror, you didn't just survive. You thrived. I had a great teacher, I whispered, squeezing his hand, even when he was showing me exactly what not to be. The morning of my father's plea hearing was bright and crisp. He wore a simple dark suit and stood tall before the judge, his voice steady as he admitted his guilt. The courtroom wasn't full. It was just a formality, but I was there. Victoria Sterling, my mother, was in the front row, and in the back, Eleanor Vance, The bankruptcy trustee watched with an unreadable look. The judge, a stern woman known for her fairness, accepted his plea and set the sentencing date for 3 months away. She reminded my father of the gravity of his crimes, of the lives he had ruined. He just listened, head bowed, taking her words. When it was over, as we walked down the courthouse steps, a few cameras flashed, but it was quiet, almost respectful. The story had moved on. He was a closed chapter, not breaking news. A simple black car was waiting, not the Rolls-Royce, something anonymous. My father paused before getting inside. I have to check in with my probation officer. Then I suppose I just wait. I'll be there, I said. Every single visiting day. He pulled me into a tight, fierce hug. I know you will. Now go on. Live your life. Build something amazing. I watched the car drive away. I had a lump in my throat, but my eyes stayed dry. This wasn't the end. It was just an intermission. A year later, the Financial Women's Association held its gala at the Mandarin Oriental. I was nominated for the Emerging Leader Award for launching the Ashcraft Initiative. In just 1 year, we had funded over 24 lawsuits against predatory lenders, advised hundreds of scammed retirees, and launched a high school program that was now being tested in 5 states. We had recovered millions for the victims. In certain circles, the name Ashcraft no longer meant scandal. It meant justice. It meant a fighting chance. I wore a simple emerald green dress. My Mother S diamonds were in my ears. My hair was pulled back. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was playing a part. I felt like I was finally myself. I'd sold the penthouse at auction for $28 million, a record for that type of building. Every single penny went into the foundation's endowment. My personal life was funded by a small salary from the foundation and the slow, steady returns on the emergency cash from the vault, which I'd put into boring index funds. I lived in a bright 2-bedroom apartment in the West Village. It was mine. My name was on the lease. I'd filed for divorce, citing adultery and abandonment. With Marcus awaiting his sentence after his testimony put Grayson behind bars, the old man was fighting extradition from Switzerland. But he was losing. The divorce was just a formality. It became final 6 weeks ago. I was Kennedy Ashcraft again. Standing at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces, powerful women in banking, law, and media, I felt none of the old panic, none of the pressure to perform. A year ago, I began, my voice clear and steady in the silent ballroom. I learned that the world I knew was a fantasy, built on lies and the fragile egos of men who thought money made them important. I was taught that my only value was in how I looked. I was told I was a burden, a problem to be handled. I saw heads nodding in the audience. Every woman in that room knew what it felt like to be underestimated. I was given a key. It was meant to lock me away in a gilded cage, to live a quiet, shameful life in the shadows. Instead, I used it to pick a lock, to break into the room where the truth was hidden. And I learned that the most valuable currency isn't money or status or property. It's truth and the will to fight for it. I talked about the foundation, about turning a symbol of my own betrayal into a force for public justice. I talked about resilience. I never mentioned Marcus or Grayson or my father by name. They were just ghosts in my story, not the main characters. I was. When I finished, the applause was like thunder, a physical wave of warmth and respect. As I stepped down from the stage, people reached out to shake my hand, to give me their cards, to whisper congratulations. Then, as the crowd started moving toward the bar, I saw him. He was leaning against a pillar near the back, half hidden in the shadows. My breath caught in my throat. Lucas Crow. We'd met what felt like a lifetime ago at Yale. He was a scholarship kid from Queens. He was brilliant, intense, and had a moral compass so strong it was almost a flaw. We'd had something. Not quite dating, but more than friends. A series of deep conversations in the library. Coffees that lasted for hours. One perfect kiss after a debate team win-win that tasted like a new beginning. But then my father made a snide comment about him. And I, desperate to please, desperate to fit in, just pulled away. Lucas saw it all. He never said a thing. He just gave me a look with those serious, dark eyes that saw everything and walked away. I'd heard he went to Stanford for law school, joined the Army's legal corps, and then got into some kind of high-level international corporate investigation. A good guy hacker. He looked older now. The softness in his face was gone, replaced by a lean, rugged handsomeness. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, and it was probably custom-made. He was watching me. A faint, unreadable smile played on his lips. I started making my way through the crowd, my heart doing a silly teenage flutter. He stood up straight as I got closer. "Kennedy Ashcraft," he said. His voice was deeper, but that Queen's accent was still there. A real groundings sound. That was one hell of a speech. "Lucas Crow," I said, stopping in front of him. "I didn't realize you were a fan of women in finance. I'm a fan of justice and of second chances." His eyes, still that intense dark brown, searched my face. "You look different. In a good way. You look real." "It's the dress," I said, trying to deflect, suddenly nervous. "It's not the dress." He smiled for real then, and it lit up his whole face, chasing away the quiet intensity. "I've been following your work, the Ashcraft Initiative. It's truly impressive. Brave. Thank you. I heard you're with Veritas International now, cleaning up corporate disasters. Something like that. We actually did some pro bono work for your foundation a few months ago. The data's analysis for the pension fund case, that was my team." I blinked. I'd seen the firm's name on the final report, but I never made the connection. "You never said anything. I wanted to see what you would build by yourself." He took us a small step closer, and the noise of the gala seemed to fade into a low hum. "I have to admit, when I saw the headlines last year, the bankruptcy, the whole scandal, I was worried about you. I thought the princess in the tower might not make it through the fall." "Turns out the tower was the prison," I said softly. "The fall was my escape." He held my gaze, and in that moment I saw the ghost of the library, the conversation we never finished, the path I never took. "I'm glad you escaped, Kennedy." "Me too." A heavy, charged silence hung between us, the kind that's full of 1,000 what-ifs. "Look," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, a boyish habit that was so familiar it made my heart ache. "This is probably terrible timing and the worst possible place, but I'm in the city for a couple of weeks, finishing up that pension case. I was just wondering if you might want to grab a coffee or a drink to talk about the foundation's work or anything, really." It wasn't a big romantic gesture. It was a quiet, hesitant question. A hand reaching out across years of bad choices. I looked at him, this man from my past who represented a different life, a different me, a version that was maybe more honest. And I realized the woman I was now wasn't the princess, or the betrayed wife, or the vengeful heiress. She was someone who fought for her truth and won. She could make her own choices, fearlessly. I smiled, a real, genuine smile that started deep in my chest. "Foundation business sounds incredibly boring, Lucas. How about dinner?" The surprise and then the slow dawn of hope in his eyes felt better than any award. "Dinner," he agreed, his own smile growing wider. Tomorrow, I asked. He nodded. "A promise." He touched my arm. Just a quick, warm touch of his fingers, and then he was gone, melting back into the crowd. He left me standing there, the emerald silk of my dress cool on my skin, see. The taste of possibility, sweet and real on my tongue. I looked across the glittering room, out at the city lights beyond the huge windows. The past was over. The debts were paid. My father was finding his own way to peace. My enemies were facing theirs. And I, Kennedy Ashcraft, was free, not just from a toxic marriage or a ruined name. I was free to choose, free to build, free to become. The beginning of my new life wasn't some dramatic sunrise. It was a quiet moment of clarity in a crowded room. It was a second chance, offered and taken. It was the simple, powerful knowledge that the most important thing I ever managed to steal back was myself. And this story's my story was really just beginning.